Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 116 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame, joined as always by the co-pilot, Matt Feuerstein. And Matt, this is probably one of the longest breaks we've ever taken on ThROH The Years. Normally we go between 2 and 3 weeks. This time we've literally been a month, and I guess now we can say one of the reasons is you went to jolly old England. You went to All In. And I think it's safe to say that we can all blame you for everything that happened there.
What, the good wrestling matches that people enjoyed?
Yeah, you're the good and the bad. You take the good, you take the bad. You take it all. And then we have Matt Feuerstein.
Well, first of all, I want to say Happy New Year to my fellow Jews out there. But second of all, yes, I didn't advertise it in advance for a couple of reasons, but partially, I am just superstitious, and I feel like if I make a big thing about how I'm going, I I've gotten sick or something, and like the whole trip would have been canceled, and I wouldn't have been able to go. So I did not announce my travels in advance, but I did spend a week in beautiful London, England, and the weather was great for that week, and I think that is definitely due to my being there. So you can thank me for All In having good weather, and it was an incredible spectacle. I will say that, and whether you whatever you feel about all the attendance drama, it was one of the most attended wrestling shows ever. I think that one is indisputable, right? I think we could say one of the most attended wrestling shows of all time.
Matt, let's ask you: did you go through a turnstile?
I did. Actually, it was.
We can confirm one. We can confirm one, folks.
Yes. One. Turnstiles were different. They were like big old, like just your whole body goes through. Not like we have in New York where like you're just like walking through one like with your waist and like it pushes it. Never mind. If you went to Wembley Stadium, you know the turnstiles I'm talking about. But they seemed pretty accurate, I gotta tell you. So whatever the turnstile count was, I'm gonna believe it. What I was thinking about as it relates to what we do here at ThROH The Years is how the wrestling world right now in September 2023 is a pretty crazy place, as it kind of always is. But, right now it's like, on the one hand, you have WWE literally becoming part of this mega conglomerate sports entertainment for real corporation. And then on the other side of things, you have AEW, which while it's having its struggles, did do that all-in thing that I can confirm. It was extremely impressive. On their side, they're just like diving more and more into this ROH 2006 era tribute promotion more than ever. And it was really stark going all in and seeing it. It was just really bizarre as I watched the show open. The giant Wembley. I mean, listen, you saw it on TV, but really being there, that place is fucking huge. Like, I went to WrestleMania, the 2 WrestleManias at MetLife Stadium, WrestleMania 29 and WrestleMania 35, and like, obviously MetLife Stadium is really freaking big. Wembley seemed that much bigger, and I know Wembley actually is bigger, but like, I don't think like that much, but it seems so huge, I guess because like, without the stage and stuff, it just seems so epic. And then to look at the ring, and I'm watching CM Punk wrestling Samoa Joe, and it's like, what universe did I just walk into that this happened? And then, a few hours later, you have, as part of a big entrance, Swerve Strickland wearing Jimmy Rave's robe, right? Paying tribute to Jimmy Rave on this massive scale. And then right next to him is Prince Nana, who I don't think we talk about enough. Prince Nana has not been, a major figure in the wrestling scene, even on the indies, for, a really long time, over a decade. And now he's part of this, big time act in AEW. He has a major role in a major match in this major show. He's going to be continuing to be part of with the Mogul Embassy. Like, he's just suddenly a major player in wrestling again. We've been talking up Prince Nana and how much we wanted him to be like in WWE, right? For so many years. And now all of a sudden he's on TV. That's crazy. And then to top that one off, I'm sitting there I'm in Wembley Stadium watching this giant main event on this giant show. And who's a major player in it? Roderick Strong. Like, a guy that I've mostly watched in these, small venues so many times through the years, and now I'm seeing him in the main event of Wembley Stadium. Now, I mean, I know he wasn't in the match, but he was a major figure in that match, and now he's a major figure. And then you just go on to AEW. I'm going to Grand Slam later this week. I know I don't think that's such news because that's in my town, but Roderick Strong has been factored into the storyline going into that. But on that show alone, the two big title matches on that show, 3 of the participants in those title matches were in the 2006 ROH vs. CZW Cage of Death match. And if you look at the rest of that match, you have someone who is a backstage producer in AEW. Right? You have somebody who has been a major on-screen figure in WWE for the past few years. You have 2 people that were just recently let go from AEW. You have, one of AEW's top stars and possibly currently the best wrestler in the world. One of them, who's about to go on his semi-retirement tour. Which I think my general conclusion from all this is somebody needs to get Nate Webb on TV.
You're not going to mention the Necro Butcher?
Let's just give Nate Webb his due for now.
He's got his own thing.
Yeah, Necro. Necro could come along. I mean, at least Necro had his moment in the sun in The Wrestler and stuff. But you know what? I wouldn't be opposed. I would not be opposed to showing some Necro some love. I know he's been a more controversial figure in recent years, but it's wrestling. There's a lot of controversial figures in wrestling, and I think listen, unless there's a story I missed, I don't think he's other than had weird opinions, I don't think he's done anything that people have wanted to cancel him for. Am I wrong about that? Did I miss something?
I don't think so. I mean, look, I am not up to date on the world of XPW and Necro Butcher as much as I should be, as much as we all should be. But I normally only pay attention occasionally for someone did a really weird MAGA angle or someone stabbed something into their penis. And then that becomes undeniable on social media and you have to see it apparently.
Well, I didn't even hear about that second one and no, I don't have to see it. Don't have to see it. What do you think about all that I just rambled about?
Yeah, no, I definitely get those pinch myself this is so weird moments. They make me feel older. They in a way they make me feel happy because it does kind of feel like, not that I was going to say we won. We didn't win anything. If you saw my life, Matt, you would know I am not a winner at much. But, it feels good that all these guys that we were spent time fretting they deserve to go on to big things. I hope they make it. I hope they make full-time livings. I hope millions of people get to see them. Most of them, not all, some deserving ones fall through the cracks, but most of these guys made it. And what blows my mind is we continue to get these weird sync-ups. We talked recently about how the first ROH show in London, us covering that coincided with All In, AEW's first show in London, and the rumor of the Nigel Danielson match that obviously got dashed when Bryan got hurt. But then I was watching the show we're going to be reviewing today, and I realized, this is when they're about 2 shows from now, they're building to a Roderick Strong Samoa Joe match, which, as we record this a few days ago on Dynamite, that was a major main event to build to a world title match on a major episode of the show.
And we're going to be reviewing that singles match in a couple episodes with Joe
exactly.
Gagney. And the next show that we're going to review has the debut of the Matt Sydal, Christopher Daniels tag team, which, as we're recording this, they tagged together on Rampage last night.
Yeah, so it really is crazy just how much they're it's funny because when Tony Khan started AEW, everyone did the old Mid-South Tony. He loves Mid-South. He's going to be very influenced by that. A lot of people over the years have now gone on for this isn't anything like Mid-South, or they're talking about, here's this video.
I gotta say, I don't think it's that much like Mid-South myself.
No, I agree. But I'm just saying, they were talking about his influence. They're talking about Mid-South. He even did that podcast with Phil Schneider talking about it. They talk about how much he loved ECW. You can find that old classic video clip of him in the crowd at an ECW show, all this stuff. But yeah, if you ask me what promotion has the most fingerprints on AEW in some ways, it's Ring of Honor, which I don't think people connect with him as much. I mean, obviously they connect with him in a big way.
I mean, he does own it. Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, in the sense of like, there aren't a lot of stories, I think, about him, like, compared to, people always reference the ECW stuff, the Mid-South stuff. They don't reference the Ring of Honor stuff. And clearly, that's all over this company right now. It has been for quite a while now.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that like when he bought ROH, it mostly became that they were titles defended on AEW TV. Like the ROH part of ROH was sort of secondary to just these are AEW belts that we're using to further AEW storylines. Often involving major ROH wrestlers. It's a really, really crazy thing. Oh, so, and the other thing I want to mention, just like I was thinking about it, sort of just tangential, but I mentioned that I went to the 2 WrestleManias at MetLife Stadium, and I just, for my money, all in, blew both of those shows away. Like, I mean, just in terms of atmosphere, matches, and stuff. But those 2 WrestleManias had, I would say, one great match each, and it's funny to think, WrestleMania 29, the one great match was CM Punk versus The Undertaker. And WrestleMania 35, the one great match was Daniel Bryan against Kofi Kingston. So it's like, you can't, I don't know how anyone could argue that Ring of Honor in this era was just like one of the most influential promotions ever. Like, it didn't change what wrestling was the way ECW did, but it sure did promote a lot of wrestlers who came to dominate the industry and be influential in their own right in the following 20 years. So I think sometimes people underrate how important Ring of Honor was. And I hope when Shane Hagedorn's book comes out, people see, the whole breadth of what it actually was. I mean, I hope people listen to our podcast and learn that too, but it's just putting it in context. And maybe we won't fully be able to do that until we finish this podcast. But it's crazy to think how influential it was. And the more I talk about it, the more I wonder, like, maybe even just the booking style and the wrestling style itself, maybe it was in some ways influential the way ECW was. Not just in terms of the talent, but in terms of the style. Because obviously there wouldn't have been a lot of what we saw in Raw Nitro without ECW. But it's certainly easy to say there wouldn't be a lot of what we see on Dynamite without ROH, and there probably wouldn't be a lot of what we see on WWE if it wasn't for ROH at this point. So I don't know. I think I'm starting to be sold more and more on the idea that Ring of Honor was maybe not quite as influential as ECW, but comparable in some ways.
The one thing that kind of struck me just while you were talking about like even the great WrestleMania matches like Daniel Bryan and CM Punk, being in those WrestleManias you picked out and thinking about the influence of ROH is just like there are a lot of so many wrestlers, most wrestlers had at least a stop in the indies before they although there's a little bit sometimes you get someone that just comes from WWE developmental fully, but usually they make a stop at the indies. But I think one thing again that thinking about Ring of Honor just now, you prompting this, is how many people didn't just come from Ring of Honor, but like they came out of Ring of Honor into the bigger promotions fully formed. Like the CM Punk you got in WWE and AEW is the CM Punk you got in ROH. The Bryan Danielson.
I would say yes, with a caveat that I think CM Punk, when he first debuted in WWE and in ECW, was probably a little bit different. But like when he finally got over and he was able to be himself, he just went back to the version that we watched in ROH.
Yeah. But I think there's a lot of wrestlers, whether it's Bryan Danielson or other guys, like they pick up other, Bryan Danielson adds the yes thing and stuff. But like so many of those wrestlers that succeeded out of ROH, they kind of, they came out of it mostly who they were, maybe a guy like Seth Rollins has changed because
Samoa Joe, right? Like
yeah. So it wasn't even like, oh, they had some they got some initial experience. They got noticed, but then they really got, polished somewhere else. It's like, no, so many of those guys went to NXT and they were like, people would do the old thing of, oh, they need to learn how to work to the hard camera, when like they would go to NXT and instantly be the best wrestlers there and like clearly already ready for the main roster. But
I think this speaks to ROH's influence in the sense of when you talk about, there are some people that, just came through the WWE system. in the 2000s, there were a lot more of those people. And it changed because they started getting guys from the indies, and the guys from the indies got over as superstars. And so you don't have as many of the WWE produced wrestlers as you used to. Obviously there's still some. I mean, they're not. I mean, WWE still has their their performance center, and they still have people they train. But I mean, it's funny because there was an era just a couple of years ago where AEW started, and WWE was like, you know what, we're not going to do the indie guys anymore, right? Like, do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. And no guy under 6'2" again or whatever. All that stuff.
That seems to already be out the window.
Yeah, but. So yeah, that was a crazy trip. I'm glad I missed you, Matt, even though we did still talk on DMs, but I missed you, Matt. I'm glad you had a good time.
I didn't just do wrestling stuff. I went sightseeing and enjoyed jolly old England. But I don't think, unless there's like a big contingent of my friends from here, I don't think I'm going to go back to the next All In, just because, like, it's a lot of
Nigel Danielson.
It's a lot of money. And I feel like I have other trips I need to do in my life, even wrestling related. I haven't been to Japan. Not saying I'm going to go to Japan next year, but it feels like something worth saving up for. I haven't even been to a CMLL show in Mexico. So there's stuff like that. And of course, non-wrestling trips. I do have other interests.
I was just going to say you should follow Danielson's last year like the Grateful Dead or something. You should just be – if he goes to Mexico to take on Blue Panther, Matt, you got to be there.
If I didn't have a job, I'd consider it. But I do want to mention one other thing before we start the show, because I am introducing a new feature on Through the Years, a new feature that will be present in every single episode that we do from now on. Are you ready for it, Trevor?
Yes, I am ready.
All right. Well, okay. So if you listen to the episode on Fight of the Century that we did with Phil Schneider, I mentioned that for my 40th birthday this year, my friends got me a Bret Hart cameo, and that was a very sweet gift, and it was fun. I also got another fun gift for my birthday. At some point in the past year or so, I was talking to a friend, and I just jokingly said, one of my lifelong goals is to have a trophy named after me. Like the Heisman Trophy or the Conn Smythe Trophy. I want a trophy named after me. And my friend was like, what would the trophy be called? And I said, I don't know, the Feuerstein Trophy or the Matt F. Trophy. And so when I went out to dinner with some friends for my 40th birthday, I received a box, and in that box was the Matt F. Trophy. So my wish was made true. But, I need to put this trophy to use. So on every episode of Through the Years from now on, I am going to award someone or something the Matt F. Trophy. There's no particular parameters to this trophy other than I think it deserves a trophy. So I'm going to try hard not to just be like, all right, this is the best match or this was the best wrestler, so they get the trophy. I'm going to give it to something or someone for some reason that is hard to explain. My only rule that I'm going to make for myself is I will try to explain why. But I will tell you.
It'd be funny if you didn't. If you were just like, this fan of the third row, he knows who he is. Matt F. Trophy winner.
Yeah, I mean, that would be funny. But, the Matt F. Trophy is no laughing matter, Trevor. So, so I'll be honest right now. Even at this moment, I am vacillating between two possible winners of the Matt F. Trophy for this particular show that we're reviewing. I will decide at the end of the show which of those two things, or people, or whatever, you'll find out, get to be their first recipient of the Matt F. Trophy.
Question, Matt.
Yes.
Can I win the Matt F. Trophy?
I can give the Matt F. Trophy to whoever I want.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. I just want to say, Matt, I am genuinely excited for this. It's a whole new dimension. This podcast, over half a decade in, we're switching it up, and I want to add, inspired by you, inspired by the controversy this week of the PWI 500 coming out, as it always inspires controversy. Every episode, starting this episode, we will now be doing the TWD 500, where I will be naming my top 500 wrestlers after every episode based on what happened on that show. It's going to be tough because most Ring of Honor shows, Matt, I don't know if you know this, don't use 500 people. Not even half of that.
I'm not sure any have.
I don't know. Well, you know what, Matt? We're going to find out.
Maybe some of those 2003 shows. Maybe that Special K match in the first anniversary. Maybe that had 500 people, but not since then.
So yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun today. It's going to be a fun episode, but one quick thing I want to get to before we get to the fun parts, which is obviously we usually bring up when someone that is a Ring of Honor alumni passes away. Obviously, we've been off for a month. In between last episode and this episode, Terry Funk passed away. There's not much we can really say that a million people haven't already said. We already said at the time, made our own comments on social media. You're going to see a million podcasts that paid tribute to him and websites far better than we could. I'll just say, obviously, he is one of the tippy top legends of all time. He only had one match in Ring of Honor, but if you want to talk about someone that had influence to generation upon generation of wrestling around the world, it was Terry Funk. And then likewise, while we're bringing up really notable tragic deaths, Bray Wyatt, who had nothing to do with Ring of Honor, he also passed away, obviously, way, way before anyone should pass away. And for both of them, as we always say, whenever we have to bring up someone that passed away, our condolences to, on the off chance, any family or friends. You never know who's listening to Through the Years. Sometimes you get surprised. Condolences. Hope you guys, everyone keeps on keeping on, and, you recover as best you can after a loss. I know it's tough. So with that said, we have one piece of news that between the last Ring of Honor show and this one, and it's really kind of it's Matt, it's a sign of the times we are covering, because this is something that's happened once or twice before in Through the Years history, and it's happening again. It's a major angle development that's happening not on the DVD, not live in the building, not that didn't make to the DVD, but on LiveJournal, the old blog site. So I'll go to the PW Torch first. In the Torch, they wrote, as part of a storyline, Chris Hero revealed in his LiveJournal that he and Claudio Castagnoli were the ones who stole the ROH World Tag Team titles from Austin Aries and Roderick Strong. Hero announced he had signed an open contract to partner with Claudio Castagnoli to challenge Aries and Strong on September 16 in Manhattan. So this LiveJournal happened on August 17th. I'm going to read the Chris Hero LiveJournal because this is such a class. This is just such a great bit of flavor for where wrestling was, where guys were cutting basically like E-Fed promos on the indies on their LiveJournals to further real wrestling storylines. So this is Chris Hero's LiveJournal. Well, boys, I guess the cat is out of the bag. No need for any further investigation. There's also no further need for underestimation. Claudio and myself are capable of doing whatever we put our mind to. We got the belts, snuck them over to the UK, and returned them without a single solitary soul being any wiser. Damn, we're good. When I left that note, I wrote, "These will be ours." It wasn't a threat. I would even go as far as to say it was a declaration of absolute truth. As a matter of fact, come September 16th in New York City, myself and Claudio Castagnoli, the kings of wrestling, will be holding a pair of titles, Chikara's Campeones de Pareja and the Ring of Honor Tag Team Championship. How in the hell is that going to happen, you may ask yourself? I can understand your curiosity, but it's quite simple, really. I'm going to humor you and explain to you folks why things are falling into place the way they are. Claudio and myself are former CZW Tag Team Champions, and this past February, we defeated Skida and Milano Collection AT in the finals of Chikara's Tag World Grand Prix. By doing so, we became the first ever Campeones de Pareja, and then he writes in parentheses, Tag Team Champions, you morons. However, in the 6 months following that victory, we've only managed one defense. Why is that? Well, here at Chikara, to get a shot at the goal, you need to amass 3 consecutive victories. You get a point for each victory, and if you lose, your point total goes back to 0. 3 points equals a title shot. Thus far, only one team has been able to accumulate those 3 precious points. This is unacceptable. We are not paper champions. We don't wear the belts for decoration. We are the hottest and best tag team of the last decade, and we intend on proving it. We contacted Chikara's director of fun, Leonard F. Chikarson. Hey, Matt, we know that guy. And he managed to pull some strings. You know those open contracts that Austin Aries and Roderick Strong have floating around? Well, through the Chikara front office, good old Leonard acquired one said contracts, little typo there, from Chris Hero, and delivered it to Claudio and myself. Like I said before, it was quite simple, and it'll also be quite simple come September. Aries and Roddy are no match for Chris Hero and Claudio Castagnoli. The Kings of Wrestling are the next Ring of Honor Tag Team Champions. September 16th, New York City, Kings reign supreme, signed CH. So, yeah, that's a promo last. Like, it's amazing because this show, it's that we're covering tonight, it takes place August 25th. So over a week after he writes this promo, they don't acknowledge that Hero and Claudio have revealed themselves or that they're going to get a tag title shot. Like,
because as I've said a million times, there are two continuities. There's the DVD continuity, and then there's the Newswire / live event continuity. They don't have to sell tickets to Glory by Honor on the DVD because the DVD comes out after Glory by Honor happens. Yeah. So they're not worried about it. So they just have all this last minute stuff. It's actually funny. That's another influence on AEW. I think Tony Khan, maybe he wasn't following the ROH Newswire and he just watched the DVDs. So to him, everything just happened at the last minute, including Samoa Joe being announced as wrestling Kenta Kobashi. Happened on the week before. So Tony Khan, according to the DVDs, I mean. So Tony Khan probably saw that and was like, this is how you build a big match. I'm joking. But that is, I mean, it's kind of like, that would make sense. Because if it is true though, if you just watch the ROH DVDs, they did not know that Samoa Joe and Kenta Kobashi were going to wrestle until the week before the Joe versus Kobashi match, even though, in the real world, they announced it, weeks, maybe months earlier. So it's just kind of funny to think about that.
Matt, I'll have you know, there's vast differences between AEW and Ring of Honor. I think you're overstating it a little bit. Like, for example, recent ticket sales in the U.S. are at least 3 or 4 times more than 2006 Ring of Honor. But don't know why I was so snarky there. The joke was there. I had to take it. But, Matt, let's go. Let's go to – finally, I missed doing this with you, Matt. Honestly, I did. Our longest break in a long time. We are back with, of all shows, Epic Encounter 2 took place August 25th, 2006 at the St. Paul Armory in St. Paul, Minnesota, in front of a reported crowd of 500 fans. A couple notes about this, Matt. This is the first Ring of Honor show in Minnesota in over 2 years. The last one was Ring of Honor Reborn, Stage 1, a very important show. And just like that show, Wade Keller's here, and he wrote a full show report. So after every match, Matt, not only are we going to have the Matt F. Award, we're going to have Wade Keller as he didn't give us permission, but we don't really need it, but he's a pseudo guest because he will be also reviewing every match from this show through the past.
Wade Keller through the past. I will say this about this crowd. This was, I don't know if it was the miking. This was a weird as hell sounding crowd. Like, it was super, super quiet most of the time. And then occasionally when there was a pop, it would sound like insanely loud for about 10 seconds and then get really quiet again. Like, I'm sure the crowd was quiet, but the way it was, definitely was something unusual about it.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It was weird. Like, I was wondering, like, did they just mic that was this was like the opposite of bad miking. This sounded like sometimes you watch a wrestling show and you can kind of just tell that like the crowd live is louder than you're hearing. There's just a way, it's hard to explain. You can just kind of tell like, oh, this show is being mic'd that. This was almost the opposite where I was watching at certain points. And like you said, like when they pop for certain things, I was like, this crowd it didn't sound like they were fake noise, but it was like the crowd couldn't have sounded this loud in the building because this is just insanely loud sounding. And like you were saying, Ring of Honor, I don't know if they've ever had a crowd like this where, they would be mostly quiet during matches, but whenever a spot happened that was like worthy of any kind of pop, it would be like this huge explosion and then right back to quiet. Like it was really bizarre.
Very strange.
It's a different kind of crowd.
Different kind of crowd, different kind of miking of the crowd. But it made the show feel very weird.
The PW Torch talked to Gabe Sapolsky, and according to them, they wrote, Gabe Sapolsky tells PW Torch regarding the return to St. Paul after 2.5 years, we were very happy with the return to St. Paul. The crowd was great and into everything. We feel we definitely have something to build on there. Matt, I double-checked just to make sure. Ring of Honor runs one more show in St. Paul in April of 2007, and then they don't come back.
Yep.
So apparently they didn't have much to build on. I mean, 500 people, if that's a true crowd, that was like a pretty standard, decent crowd for Ring of Honor in this era.
But Trevor, when are those numbers ever true?
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, there's a note here. There's a couple more notes. We have a PW Torch live report from Chris Vetter. He wrote, "The crowd, much credit has to be given to NIW promoter Andrew Scalzi." I probably butchered your last name. No offense if I didn't mean to. Scalze, who was handing out flyers in the spring at his shows, telling fans about this card. There were a lot of local indie workers in the crowd, and virtually every regular indie fan I've come to know in the Twin Cities. Scalzi's work locally is the difference between this show's attendance being a success. And I guess that's something maybe we don't talk about much, where there are, like, IWA Mid-South during its era would have put on these all-star cards and hardly anyone would show up. And I think sometimes people forget, like, on the indie grassroots level, how important it is to have, like, good local promotion. Because when you think about it, having a good street team, local promotion, if it's like a show like WWE, if you can draw like an extra 100 fans to a show that's drawing like 11,000 for a SmackDown taping or whatever, that's not going to make much of a difference at all. But for indie like Ring of Honor, like 400, the difference between 400 and 500 in 2006 is a drastic difference. So you just have one person that's really good about getting the word out, who has connections, who is running another indie and can really hype that can make a huge difference. I feel like the reason a lot of indies fail is because they don't have those connections. They don't go that extra mile, to squeeze out that extra 50, that extra 100 people if you can get it,
Yeah, I mean, I think even on big arena shows, it makes a difference. Like, I don't know. I mean, I'm only in the market that I'm in, but, maybe that has something to do with AEW's ticket performance, in that maybe they don't do enough good local promotion on some of these shows. I mean, I certainly, walking around the city, wouldn't know that there was any big AEW show happening this week if it wasn't for the fact that I just know,
Yeah, I definitely saw someone on Twitter yesterday, like some people have been posting around a quote where Dave Meltzer going over the really scary low advanced ticket sales for upcoming AEW shows. And one person I saw on Twitter posted like, "Oh, if I didn't see this quote floating around on Twitter, I wouldn't have even known like AEW's coming to my town in the next few weeks."
Yeah.
So yeah, that goes right to your point. I mean, and finally we got some Wade Keller notes before we get to the show proper. Wade Keller wrote, "There's no doubt when driving past an armory on a Friday night that when you see the line outside the building, it's a wrestling crowd. At least to me, familiar with the demographics of the fans who attend. As last time ROH came to town 2.5 years ago, despite reserved seats, 90 minutes before the show, there was a long line of fans outside the door. When the doors opened, most went to the merchandise table rather than their seats. ROH's selection of DVDs and an expanding selection of t-shirts and other merchandise make ROH events a mini wrestling fans convention. Everyone who attends an ROH event shares a certain bond of knowing a secret that the best contemporary wrestling action anywhere in the country is in ROH. My ROH experience was once again really good. I really cannot recommend attending a live ROH show enough to those who are fortunate enough to live in an area where ROH goes. The crowd intensity, the hardworking nature of the wrestlers, and the organic feel of the shows is nothing like WWE. The wrestlers are every bit as good as top-level WWE wrestlers, but they're younger, more eager, and allowed to go out and have really good matches from top to bottom. Since ROH events are all on DVD, if you can't attend in person, purchase a DVD just to see if it's for you. It's also the type of show you can take a non-fan, and afterward, they still might not be a fan, but they'll never question why you're a fan again." I think Wade, when he gets like really enthusiastic about things, he's adorable, even if he's sometimes goofy. I will say that line at the end about if you bring a non-fan, they'll never question why you're not a fan ever again. I feel like I kind of had that mindset probably around this era, and I feel like I had enough experiences where I was like, no, they'll still question you, at least in my experience. They'll be like,
I don't know. I mean, maybe the era has changed, but most of my friends are not wrestling fans, but I don't find that people think it's weird that I like it anymore. Like when I in like, the 90s, even when it was popular in the 2000s, people thought it was weird. But now I think people have enough of an idea of what it is and why it's popular that I don't find that anyone is like, well, that's like, why do you like that shit? And occasionally I will genuinely get non-fan friends who occasionally will be like, hey, can I come to a show with you? Like, just not because they want to watch wrestling, like, for good, but just because they're curious about it and they find it amusing. And I've taken a couple non-fan friends before, and they usually, again, like Wade said, they don't become fans, but they're not, like, laughing at how ridiculous it is the whole time either. I do think that the mindset has changed.
Yeah, I think it has between the time Wade wrote this and these years later. But I will say, it sent me memories of back to when I was like in my late teens, early 20s around this time, and being like, I would try and tell people, these days I don't watch WWE, that's over the top stuff. I watch this more realistic, harder stuff like, in Japan and ROH. And anytime I showed someone, they'd be like, it's still people pretending to fight. Like, it's still people that bounce into ropes and then bounce off like they have unstoppable momentum. Like,
you just read them back what Herb Kunz wrote for his Wrestling Tidbits, like the intro, where he's like, it is completely believable. The Japanese call it pro-resu. It is the wrestling of which I am a fan. And you say that, and then they totally get it.
I haven't heard someone say it's the wrestling of which I am a fan probably since 20 years ago. Oh man, I missed that. Matt, you give yourself the Matt F award. You just tickled me pink.
Let's get Herb on the show.
One thing that was refreshing about that Wade quote, last thing, is how many times on this show, and I think by this time Dave had kind of outgrown it for the most part, but how many times in the early years of ROH and through the years have we read quotes from Dave Would be like, this Ring of Honor thing was great, but it would never work in WWE, where Wade is going the opposite, where he's like, these guys are just as good as anyone in WWE, and in fact they have less restrictions. Like, this is the kind of thing that we were crying out for in like 2002, 2003. And now we're actually getting it from somebody in 2006. Although, again, I think by this point, Dave had mostly kind of the indie stigma that he had kind of grown up around for a decade. Like, I think he had realized Ring of Honor wrestlers are really good. There's a little bit of that.
You're going to be disappointed in some reviews you read over the next couple of years, then, because that has not gone away from Dave at this point.
Well, we will open the show finally proper with Jimmy Jacobs and Lacey backstage. Jacob says all the guys are talking about rumors of Lacey and Colt Cabana together in a car that was rocking. And baby, he just wants to know it isn't true. And Lacey just tells him, as usual, to shut up. Don't be concerned with that. Don't be concerned with rumors started on the internet by pathetic loser men. She says if Jimmy wants to impress her, maybe he should beat someone like Homicide, who she just so happens to have signed Jimmy to face tonight. Lacey says tomorrow night, though, she won't care about titles. Tomorrow will be personal. And on that day, she wants Jimmy to take out B.J. Whitmer and end his career. Jimmy says that he will. So
I like Jimmy Jacobs' Bruiser Brody shirt.
Yeah, it's a nice little touch. Even though he's not doing the Huss thing anymore, he's still wearing the Bruiser Brody shirt. And that brings us to the opening match. The Briscoe brothers, Jay and Mark, defeated Irish Airborne, Dave Crist and Jake Crist, in 10 minutes, 47 seconds, when Jay made Dave Crist submit to the stretch plum. So the story of this match was, since the Irish Airborne eliminated the Briscoes from a recent Ultimate Endurance match in a big upset, the Briscoes apparently demanded this match. We saw not too many shows before that, the Briscoes take on Irish Airborne for the first time in ROH in a match that was decent, but pretty disappointing by Briscoe standards. Matt, what'd you think about the rematch here?
It was much simpler, and I liked it better. It was just they just weren't as ambitious. They just had a tag team match, and they did some of their cool moves. And the Briscoes, had a short domination period over the Crists. And I feel like there wasn't any sort of, botches. The execution was good. And I like that the Briscoes won in a completely unique way. One thing I like, in general, is when wrestlers get over different finishes. Has Jay Briscoe at this point won any matches with the stretch plum that you could think?
I was going to ask you, I don't recall him. He doesn't even pull it out. He'll pull it out occasionally in a match, but it's not even a move he does every match, let alone I can't recall him winning a match with the stretch plum.
Yeah, and I thought that the Chris, the Irish Airborne, all their finesse stuff and the arm drags and the, leaping backwards off the ropes, I thought it all hit well. I'd say this was the best, to me, Irish Airborne match that I'd seen maybe period in ROH at this point. It's not like this was a great match or anything, but it was just like a good opener. And, I thought that Jake Christ's shooting star press to the outside was not as good as Mark Briscoe's, but it was still nice that he did it against the Briscoes. I thought that was cool. But just in general, I thought that everyone looked good. I thought the finish was cool. I thought the structure was good and simple, and I thought this was just a good match.
Yeah, it's funny. I thought the last Briscoe's Irish Airborne match was the match where the Irish I have no inside knowledge, but I had this hunch that the last Irish Airborne Briscoe's match was the match that kind of ended the mini push they were getting, because it feels like after that, it just they didn't really have any more momentum.
Well, they did get to eliminate the Briscoes in that Ultimate Endurance match after that.
But this match kind of confirms to me, because it feels like this match is like telling you, hey, if you thought the Irish Airborne were like going places, like, no, that match, that elimination was a complete fluke, because I thought the Briscoes dominated this match for the most part. It wasn't a squash, but I thought they were pretty dominant. Even late when Jake Chris gets the hot tag, it's a 2-move hot tag. Now, granted, those 2 moves are really cool. It's a flying double missile dropkick where he has like one leg on each Briscoe, which I guess in AEW parlance that would be a double flying kangaroo kick.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he does, like you mentioned, it was, as you said, it was nice of him to do the shooting star press to the floor. I mean, the Irish Airborne, this match, they didn't even get to do their Irish Air Raid finisher like they did in their previous match. And yeah, how many times do you even see Jay Briscoe win a match, get to beat anyone with the stretch plum? So I feel like this match was kind of like letting you know that was a fluke. But like you, I do think the shorter runtime worked for this match. I think the pace seemed a bit snappier than the first match as a result. It's a lot of the 2006 kind of classic Briscoe style of just unrelentingly running through their offense, seeing like this brutal machine of a team, in my opinion. Like these two teams' previous match, though, I do kind of feel like, I said this on the last one, I feel like the Briscoes project so much physicality during this era that like it almost makes the Irish Airborne look weaker by comparison. Like the Briscoes in these matches feel like total ass kickers, and the Irish Airborne feel like a competent mid-aughts flippy-do indie tag team. But
like that doesn't bother me, Like I just like fine, okay, yeah. Who cares if they don't look yeah. like comparable?
That's what I would say that's what they were. They were a competent mid-aughts flippy-do indie tag team.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would give this match a low good. I think this was a slight bit more. I was a little bit more enjoyable than their last match. And I especially liked also near the end, the ending. I loved where Jay did a really impressive delay on his gorilla press into a Death Alley driver. Like he held the guy up for extra little bit. And then Mark immediately follows it up with a foot stomp. Then he immediately goes into a big dive on the floor. And then Jay immediately puts the guy in the stretch. It was just one of those really fun bam, bam, bam with the unexpected finish kind of sequences. That's really an emphatic win for one team that just, again, I think made the Briscoes look like $1 million and like just killers. And yeah, so absolutely. And again, like I was going to point this out at this point, looking at my notes, but we already pointed out how weird this crowd is where, completely silent. And then when a cool spot happens, they explode for a moment. Like it's like they've never seen live wrestling before. So, we should also mention Dave Christ still he wrestled this match with a dang cast on his whole right hand, still had an injured hand. So, always impressive when a guy finds a way to wrestle even with a broken hand. Take notes, Bryan Danielson, you wuss.
Oh, God.
Finally we'll go to Wade Keller had his own thoughts, his first review of the night. He wrote, a very good opening match, which prompted ROH's proud owner, Kerry Silkin, to call me over to tell, where else in the country are you going to see that action in an opener? 3 stars. So I like the idea that Kerry Silkin was so excited. He was like, Wade, did you just see that? Did you see that, Wade? I like to imagine he was doing that the whole show.
And somebody replied, PWG, IWA Mid-South, maybe Chikara, sometimes CZW. No, but anyway, no, I'm not taking anything away. I mean, this was in this era, this stuff was, pretty awesome.
So, after the match, Jay Briscoe grabs the mic Jay starts by saying that Irish Airborne didn't stand a chance. Their win over the Briscoes at the Ultimate Endurance was the luckiest of their career, and they're happy to make examples of their punk asses. Jay moves on, says he doesn't care if it's Samoa Joe, Homicide, Kenta, Davey Richards, any one of you pussies. If you want to throw down with a couple country boys, the Briscoes will gladly oblige. And then Mark tells us to man up. So again, Jay basically name checking everyone they've been involved with or are about to be involved with.
This is the second B show, I think, where you get a lot of like just the Briscoes cutting promos to like with as like a mission statement and then coming out and like attacking their enemies. Because I feel like that happened on another recent like B show, maybe the one in Detroit or Chicago back in June. I don't totally remember which one.
Yeah, and we will get more Briscoes later. Multiple, I think, sequences of the Briscoes causing Briscoe action to spontaneously happen. We go to Matt Sydal backstage for something that is going to be even more awkward than my transition there. Matt Sydal says 2 years ago, this building was the place where he and Delirious had their do or die match, which got them spots on the ROH roster. Sydal says since then, he just got back from Japan, Canada, and England, where he says he's been, quote, drinking protein shakes and changing the world. Sydal says when he first wrestled Delirious, that man was borderline schizophrenic, but now he says Delirious is the official full-blown bizarre maniac of Ring of Honor.
That's supposed to be like in contrast to being schizophrenic? Yeah. You went from being schizophrenic to a full-blown bizarre maniac.
Sydal says he's ready for everything and ready for Delirious. Tonight, Matt Sydal does, and Delirious dies. I just wrote in my notes, Matt, holy fuck, Matt Sydal was bad at promos. He was trying, but his delivery was just so corny and forced and kind of annoying. Like, he's trying really hard. This isn't one of those guys that has like a flat affect that's kind of like the deer in the headlights. He's really trying.
Well, Trevor, I think one thing I've learned about myself as we did this podcast is I love awkward, odd, over-the-top promos. And whether it's Ace Steel doing them, or Matt Sydal doing them, I found this so charming. Like, yes, this was really bad, but I just found it so funny and entertaining. Like that big smile on his face as he was doing it, his voice saying drinking protein shakes and changing the world, which totally reminded me of the time Hulk Hogan on Nitro said he was backstage eating fruit and being cool. And just, I love this, Trevor. Like, it was so bad and I loved it. And I love odd, unique promos because, WWE just at this point was not letting people do promos if they weren't like scripted or good at them. So you just didn't get strange nonsense like this. This felt like the sort of promo you'd get on like some random territory TV show in a studio in 1983. And, by the 2000s, you weren't getting that on TV. And I like that you could get it at an ROH DVD. Matt Sydal, say what you want about him. This was, again, not a good promo, but like you got a sense of his personality here. And I do think this was, exemplary of his actual personality. And yeah, I like this bad promo, Trevor.
Yeah, and I will say there are two types of bad promos. Like I said before, there's the deer in the headlights, kind of frozen, very flat, like you're scared, kind of, I'm going to take you on, blah, blah, and then there's this. And to me, I much prefer this. Like, if you're not great at a promo, if go big, really go for it. And you can't say that Matt Sydal was not going for it. Like, the recap, you might go, didn't sound like that bad of a promo. Just his awkward verbiage and his enthusiasm, the way he comes off. It's one of those things you really kind of have to see.
Yeah.
Like, it's more awkward in watching than in my recap, even though you might get a bit of the flavor with the drinking protein shakes and changing the world.
This is only a minute or two, right? But I still think it's the longest solo promo Matt Sydal had ever gotten in ROH at this point.
And also, again, Ring of Honor, like, guys aren't going to get better if you don't let them have chances to cut promos, Yep. And they gave him a chance. So that brings us to Homicide defeating Jimmy Jacobs via pinfall in 11 minutes, 56 seconds after he hits a lariat. So before the match even starts, we have to talk about between Jimmy's entrance and before Homicide's entrance starts, the power it cuts out to the lights that Ring of Honor brings to every show to light up the ring. So normally Ring of Honor for years now, what they had been doing was they turn off the house lights. So the building's mostly dark, and then they bring their own lighting rig they purchased. And so it's just lighting the ringside and ring area. So The lights completely shut out. Jimmy proceeds to cut a promo in the dark saying the problem isn't with the power, it's with the dorks here, calling them so 2003. The crowd chants shut the fuck up. And obviously at this point, Jimmy is clearly just desperately trying to stall for time as they fix the issue. And so he starts to sing the Ballad of Lacey in the ring, which draws boos. And then finally, it doesn't take too long. They turn the house lights on. They start to warm up, and the house lights start to light up the building. And then they're able to fix the lighting rigs, like the Ring of Honor lighting rigs, late in the match. No, I think it's somewhere in the middle of the next match.
Yeah, it comes back during the Claudio Daniels match.
Yeah. So either way, we hit Homicide's music. We get to the match, and this was the equivalent of the lights going out. Because let me just say this, man. I'll be interested. There's a couple of matches I'm really interested to see how our opinions compare or contrast. This is one of them because let me just say this, Matt. We've seen worse matches than this on through the years. We've seen really short matches, student matches that just completely fell apart or that a crowd absolutely turned on, like the Jeff Hardy match, all that kind of stuff. I can't remember the last time on this podcast we've seen, at least in my opinion, a match between two people this talented that got this much time that was this poor.
I can think of one off the top of my head, but I will save it for when I say.
Like, if you've been listening to this podcast for any length of time, you know my review range where I sometimes I'll say star ratings, but I'll usually do, average, above average, good, very good, great, and then like a superlative, just crazy word I'll think up on the spot, sometimes even above that. And I very rarely on this show say below average or bad, because Ring of Honor is just a company built around good wrestling, and that's the meal ticket for the company. And so there's usually a very high floor, a very high kind of like core competency among the roster. I'm going to give this the very rare Trevor Dame on through the years below average rank, not by a ton, but I would consider this a below average wrestling match. At first, it starts with Homicide. Pretty much, he immediately takes Jacobs to the outside. He beats the crap out of him, and it's a standard like lively opening to a Homicide match. He does the thing where, he throws Jimmy on the timekeeper's table. He throws him into the barricade. He chucks chairs and things into the ring. It's like a classic regular ass Homicide opening to a match. And it did make for kind of a funny moment where like Homicide throws all that stuff in the ring. And he does this sometimes where like he then doesn't use all that stuff. So like he throws it in the ring and then he goes in the ring and he's like politely just hands the ring bell to the ref to dispose of it. Like, okay, I threw this in the ring. Can you get rid of this for me? And the match, again, I felt like, we're getting off. I like both these guys. We're getting off to a decently hot start. And then it never gets going. Like once this match gets in the ring and really starts, it never gets any momentum. There's this really odd hitchy vibe to it where Jimmy's often selling a little longer than he needs to, or he isn't quite in the right position. The match doesn't lose flow. It never gets into flow like at all to begin with. At times, like when Jimmy starts working over Homicide's arm at one point, this match slows into such a crawl. You can literally hear one fan shout boring a couple times, which will be not the last time that happens on this show. Even when the match hits some bigger moves in the final minute or two, it just feels off to me. Like it doesn't feel like the finish where Homicide hits the lariat. It doesn't feel like it builds to a crescendo as much as it's Homicide just going, let's cut our losses. Let's finish this. And I have no idea why this went so wrong. I like both these guys quite a bit. It could be as simple as a lack of chemistry, but it felt weirder to me than that. Like, I noticed Jimmy was favoring his leg often during this match, starting when he got thrown onto the table early on, and Homicide never worked on the leg, so maybe that was a legit injury. I was going to even say maybe the lighting problems threw them off, except I can't imagine that because the house lights were on for this whole match. So in that sense, it was actually better lit than the average Ring of Honor match of this era. So at the end of the day, it was just a very weirdly disjointed, meandering, boring match. The only two highlights I found were Homicide singing. At one point, Homicide's beating up Jimmy Jacobs, and he goes, "Sing for me, Jimmy." And then he goes, "Oh, Homicide." Which is Homicide singing, which I thought was very adorable. And then there was one cool Jimmy Jacobs senton where normally when someone does a top rope move, you see them, they'll climb to the top turnbuckle and they'll kind of steel themselves for at least a few seconds, sometimes many seconds, and really prepare themselves. Jimmy Jacobs doesn't do that here. Like, he and Homicide are fighting on the top turnbuckle. He, pushes Homicide off, and the second Homicide's back lands on the mat, Jimmy's jumping off and coming down with a senton, and it looked really cool and almost in a reckless way. I really dug that, but overall, I really did not like this match. There's just very awkward, disjointed, never got going. Blah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're wrong. I don't think it's as unusual as you seem to think it is in ROH at this era to have matches like this. So this match didn't stand out to me as being particularly bad. Like, I could think of a bunch of matches that were just like meander. I mean, like, I remember that Joe versus Claudio match from Cleveland, I think it was, back in April of 2006. I think it was like similar, like where you just had two great wrestlers that just had like this kind of like whatever kind of match. At least for this one, I like just the vibe of, like the wackiness at the beginning, with Homicide chasing him around. I like Jimmy hitting his crazy like torpedo headbutt. I like the Homicide singing. He says, "Homicide punch is a crazy motherfucker punch." Homicide's back rake, which back raking has become a hot thing on TV wrestling in the past couple years. And I also enjoy watching stuff with the house lights on. I just, that's a look that I like. Maybe I wouldn't like it if it wasn't as rare, but I don't know. I don't mind the look. The one thing I will say, there's a couple matches on this show where the wrestler just like pushes the referee. Homicide shoved the ref out of the way at one point when he was going up to Lacey on the apron, and it's just like, what is the point of rules like that wrestlers can just push the referee aside? It's a pet peeve of mine. The other thing is, I think I know why the Homicide angle after Death Before Dishonor didn't get over the way it should have. They don't follow up at all. Like on the next couple shows, Homicide is doing stuff with Adam Pearce and Steve Corino, but Cornette's not there. No one's really cutting.
Doesn't Cornette return on the next show?
He might return on the next show, but like that's a long time.
Yeah,
like that's there's no follow up. Like it takes a long time for Cornette to come back. They're not like this certainly Homicide does not feel like a main eventer on this show. He wasn't even on the two UK shows. Like they don't keep any momentum. So it just feels like he's adrift in the mid card when they're building him up for this giant title match. I know they get back to him being in the main events and stuff, and they put him in a feud with the Briscoes, and he teams with Joe at Glory by Honor. I'm not saying like they just give up on him, but I think that there was too much of a gap between the big angle and actually pushing Homicide.
The thing that the fans seem to be more excited for when it comes to Homicide is not like the Cornette feud. It's the idea that, he's going to be the world champ. Because when Homicide comes out, they're chanting next world champ for him, which actually led to a really cute moment where Jimmy bows to the crowd like he thinks it's for him. I thought that was a cute little moment. Wade Keller's review of this. Wade wrote, during ring intros, the lights went out. Kerry ran from his seat at ringside to the back to tend to the technical glitch. They turned on the house lights rather than the ROH spotlights, but those were slow to warm up. To kill time, Jacobs began singing his ode to Lacey. It was a special and welcome bonus to hear the ode live and in person. 2.25 stars. I also like that after the match, Lacey's got gay into a fans, and she tells one fan, I could have beat Homicide, which I thought was funny. After the match, the Briscoes run in the ring. They attack Homicide. Homicide fights back for a second, but quickly he gets laid out with a spiked J driller. So that's the first time we'll see the Briscoes do a run-in, not the last. And that brings us to Christopher Daniels taking on Claudio Castagnoli, and Christopher Daniels defeats Claudio via pinfall in 12 minutes, 33 seconds using a cradle. Matt, this may be a match we've forgotten because I think when obviously this is playing off of the big angle at the 100th show where Christopher Daniels was doing a whole thing where I'm finally ready to shake hands with people, which is I've never done in Ring of Honor. And he decides to make the first person he gives the honor to Claudio. He's like, you're the future of Ring of Honor. And then that same night, Claudio turns on Ring of Honor, betrays them, joins CZW. And, Daniels cuts a promo or two after that on different shows being pissed off. And we talked about, but they never really follow up on this. And I think we even said do they ever do a match? And I think we thought they don't. They do. It's a random third from the bottom match on a B show in Minnesota, but they do apparently, I forgot this match happened. So I'll give that much credit to them. They do follow it up like many shows later.
Yep.
What'd you think about this epic conclusion kind of to that battle?
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about when I say what happened in Homicide versus Jacobs is not so rare, because I feel like this is not so different than what you're talking about. Like it felt not that intense and kind of meandering. Like there was a long chin lock in the middle. I thought that the finish is stupid. Again, with Claudio grabbing the briefcase, the ref trying to take it, Claudio's just shoving him away. Like and then the roll up. I don't know. There wasn't the intensity that you'd want if these two people really don't like each other. I'm surprised by how many Claudio matches during this era I have not enjoyed. I knew that I wasn't super into Daniels in this era, but I didn't realize that Claudio had just had so many kind of aimless mid-card matches. Again, these guys are pros. Everything was professionally done. But the match just felt like you said, a third from the top mid-card match on a B show. And they didn't really try to aspire above that. And it kind of disappointed me. A lot of Claudio's control segment is just him kind of walking around arguing with the crowd because they're yelling, "Hey!" And the chin lock, first of all, we'll get to chin locks later and how you could get them over, but this did not get the chin lock over. Claudio has a chin lock on for so long that they actually do a spot where Daniel's arm drops twice, and it's like, are you really wasting that moment on a chin lock when no one ever wins with a chin lock? Isn't that weird? To do a chin lock that's 2 full minutes where you're having the guy's arm drop. I don't know. That something was strange to me about that. It was indicative of how they decided to work this match and the intensity level of it. So I found this match pretty lame. I don't think it was even really much better than the match before. This feud doesn't really click until they start doing the tag matches with the Kings of Wrestling. But I wasn't into this.
See, I did like this match better than the one before, but I still didn't like this match that much. I agree mostly with you. This felt like a match Daniels has probably worked 1,000 times in 1,000 random indies and house shows in his career. It's probably a match he could do while making his grocery list in his head for that week. The match where you could be half mentally there. He gives Claudio most of the match, just, sells, lets Claudio control the match. He makes an attempted comeback here or there. He hits a move here or there, and then he gets a bit more of a comeback at the end, and then they go to the finish. And it feels it feels actually a fair bit like a random 90s or even late 80s TV wrestling match, which Ring of Honor matches usually don't feel like. Even like you mentioned, the late match chin lock that goes on for a long time. Just how kind of basic and perfunctory it is. Even the fact that the finish is Claudio grabbing his suitcase, trying to hit Daniels with it in full view of the ref, and then Daniels just ducking it or avoiding it and getting a quick cradle while Claudio's still holding the suitcase. It felt very something you would have seen on a 93, 94 Raw or something, But that said, I don't think there's anything wrong with this match. It moves at a solid mid-tempo pace. It has that very rock-solid basic match structure, but there's also nothing about it that's really memorable. Apart from maybe, there is one spot I really liked, which is Claudio. I don't know why more guys don't do this. I think this was a great spot. Claudio goes and picks up Daniels for the big delayed vertical suplex, where a lot of times he'll let them count 20, 30. He lets them count to 3, and then he drops it down. And he tells them to go fuck themselves. And I think that's I think more power wrestlers should do stuff like that.
It's a very Bryan Danielson 2006 kind of spot.
Yeah, I thought it worked. I thought this was a strong average, so one level above the last match. But in some ways, it's weird because it's a match it's one of those matches I don't feel like they aimed to do anything more in this. There are matches where they're not good because their ambitions were high, but they just failed at execution. I feel like they weren't trying to have a match better than this, which, again, I feel like Daniels, we're getting more and more of these kind of performances from him at this point.
But I'm telling you, it's weird how many Claudio performances like that there are during this era too.
Yeah, I remember really not liking Claudio in ROH. and liking him more like in Jakar and other indies and PWG. And then when I watched, when we started to rewatch him, I thought, no, he's way better than I thought. And I think I've mentioned this before. It feels like when he turned heel, it was like you flicked a switch and he stopped being good in the ring. Like, it's not that he's bad, but yeah, we get on matches like this.
He stopped putting on these like top tier performances. Yeah.
And I'm hoping that now that he's about to be put with Hero as a tag team, I'm hoping that changes things now. We'll see.
I think, not overnight, but I think it does change things.
I did also love the tantrum Claudio threw after the match where he swings his briefcase at the ref and then he just keeps swinging it around in a circle until he falls over and then he hugs his briefcase. Like, I think Claudio was good at having some hammy in the right way kind of heel reactions at this point. He was getting a bit better at that. Wade Keller's review said, Claudio's ring entrance is hilarious. He squints his eyes in a way that just cracked me up. He also was indecisive about which way to turn, left or right, once he got to the ring, and changed course a few times, and one of those had to be there moments of comedy. Daniels carried himself like a star, and really, who has been a more consistent star of the indie scene over the past decade than Daniels? This was his first match in Minnesota ever. Good match, but not a...
That's crazy trivia.
Yeah, because for a guy that was such a road warrior and like all over the place. Yeah. Good match, but not a standout match. It fit its place on the card, 2.25 stars.
And you'd think someone who's a road warrior would definitely wrestle in Minnesota because they're from Minnesota.
Yeah. It is funny though, like, it's weird. Like, Daniel's place in wrestling is so weird to me because, like, I think you and I and everyone recognizes that, like, he was a very important indie wrestler from the late 90s all throughout the last 20 years. And he's kind of like one of the most smoothest, like, surest, safest veteran hands you could have. But at the same time, I don't get jazzed about him and I don't view him the way I view, like, the legends I would view of Samoa Joe, Danielson, Punk, because he just has so many matches like this, which are, they're good workman-like matches, but they're not the kind of matches where, like, if you did the proverbial, would you want to sit down and watch, like, every match this wrestler ever had on Desert Island? I think with Daniels, I'd have so many matches like this. I'd be like, I might say, like, no, I kind of don't want to do that, you know?
Yeah, well, I remember, this era of Daniels is what, stuck in my memory before we started doing the podcast. And yeah, I agree with you. But then when we started reviewing the early era of ROH before he left, in the whole scandal situation with between ROH and TNA, I do remember liking him a lot more in that era. He was better. And this era, it's just, and his TNA work during this era was better, much like with AJ Styles too. I do think a lot of it is just, I'm just going to be a pro, but I'm not going to put my best stuff in ROH when I need to save my body for these TV shows and pay-per-views.
Yeah.
I think that's, a lot of it. Joe does it to an extent too, but Joe manages to still be usually very exciting, even in his lesser ROH performances, just, as he's just such a dynamic performer. Daniels is mostly smooth and not so much dynamic, but we have seen enough examples where he could turn it on and put on something really exciting. He just tends not to in ROH during this time period.
Agreed. Like, he is capable of greatness. We've seen that in TNA. We saw in the first year of Ring of Honor, he was one of the most important people there. He was the glue in some matches.
Great matches, great promos. I mean, go back and listen to the early episodes of Through the Years. You'll hear it.
And again, I'll say, like, if someone said, Trevor, we're going to time travel you to the 2006 ROH roster, and your life depends on you, an untrained person who's never had a match in their life, having a decent performance in the ring against someone, and it can be anyone on this roster. Daniels is either my one or two, other than Bryan Danielson.
I wouldn't pick anyone before Danielson, but yeah, Daniels would be pretty high on the list. Yeah.
Because even though he wouldn't be my second favorite wrestler on this roster, I just have a feeling from the way he works, from his reputation, from just his skill set, like, if you're ever going to have a shot of anyone on this roster, he's going to get you through to something, he'll find a way. But
wasn't he the guy that Stephen Amell worked with at All In?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think that's a coincidence that they picked him of all the guys. Cause I think he's just a really safe pair of hands. And I will also say, like, if we're doing an indie wrestling Hall of Fame, absolutely Christopher Daniels should be in any, like, indie wrestling Hall of Fame. But Next, we go outside where Delirious cuts a promo on Matt Sydal in Delirious speak. We make out a few English words here or there, like including him saying, "We come a long, long way." And it ends with him saying, "Cobra stretch, Matt Sydal, tappy, 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 tappy." And if you're asking Trevor, did you go back and watch this clip 3 or 4 times to count the exact right number of tappies to say, you would be correct.
I didn't like this as much as the Matt Sydal promo, but it was probably actually a better promo. And
Yeah.
I didn't remember Delirious having so much comprehensible material in his promos at this point. But you could mostly understand what he was talking about through the gibberish.
Yeah, I mean, basically, he was kind of cutting the same promo Matt Sydal did, except without mentioning protein drinks and changing the world. But you could tell
that was what the gibberish was, the protein drink.
Yeah. Still talking a lot about that Soylent. He's a big fan of that. Colt Cabana and Davey Richards next up. They defeat the Embassy of Jimmy Rave and Sal Rinauro in 14 minutes, 51 seconds when Cabana made Rinauro tap out to the Billy Goat's Curse, that kind of inverted Boston Crab. So this was a match I mentioned a few shows ago, I believe, and I went back and re-listened to the clip of Jimmy Rave's interview on the Honorable Mention podcast, which I often reference because it was a really good look back in a way we don't get from many Ring of Honor wrestlers at this era of Ring of Honor. And Jimmy Rave remembers this specific match as being a match where Colt Cabana and Davey Richards almost got into a fight before the match, laying it out backstage. Rave actually, I went back and listened to
now that would make this relevant to modern times.
Yeah. Matt, how? I can't even think of something. A fight backstage? Colt Cabana's name being involved somehow? I don't know. But Rave says that he, Sal, and Colt were trying to lay out the match before the show, and then Davey just comes up and is like, "Yeah, we should just all go out there and hit all our signature stuff," like kind of dismissively, just like saying, "This is what we should do, just do our stuff." And Colt apparently told Davey to shut the fuck up. And again, Rave was like, "Yeah, I remember they almost got into a fight." And then they also seem to remember that Davey was kind of hesitant at first about the idea of playing up the comedy, but to his credit, when you watch the match, he does seem game to kind of be more lighthearted and play up the comedy. But it was funny, like Jimmy was kind of talking about this as kind of a larger thing with Davey, where Davey kind of sometimes was kind of just very headstrong about wanting to do certain things and go all out and in everything, like right from the start, and not have a lot of nuance or subtlety. And I thought there was one interesting anecdote he talked about right after he talked about this, where he mentioned a match we've already covered on Through the Years, which was a 4-way on a recent show with it was Jimmy Rave, Davey Richards, Samoa Joe, and Delirious. And Jimmy remembered telling Davey after the match, trying to give him some advice where it was like, if you look at our entrances, everyone except you had a crowd interaction and a crowd connection. Like he was like, Joe comes out and he's interacting with everyone in the front row, and the fans feel like they could go out and have a beer with Joe after the show. I come out and the fans are just having a great time, like throwing the toilet paper and really yelling at me. And Delirious comes out, he runs around the ring and sticks stuff in his mouth, and everyone just loves, playing along with Delirious. And he says, you came out and you just went to the ring. You didn't associate with the fans. You just went in the ring and waited for the match to start. And he was like, you need to have that crowd connection, that bond. And you're treating this like an MMA fight where your job is just to walk to the ring and do their performance and then leave. Like you're not making that connection. And I thought that was an interesting example of the way veterans sometimes are trying to point things out to newbies. And anyway, we get to the match.
Do you agree with that, though? Do you agree that's necessary? Could it be possible that because all those other guys were connecting with the crowd, having the one guy be just no nonsense, I'm just here to wrestle, could work? Because I felt like Davey was pretty over with the crowds during this period.
I think there are wrestlers where the work can speak for themselves. I would say when you're just starting out, I might want to try a little bit harder to make the connection. Let's use an example. Kenta Kobashi didn't need to have a fun gimmick or glad hand with the fans before his match with Samoa Joe because he was a goddamn legend.
Yes.
And he was so, but if you're a new guy, I can see the idea of if you're just trying to stick. I mean, Davey Richards had a perfectly good Ring of Honor career. He became world champion. He was over, but I can kind of see Jimmy Ray from the perspective of a guy like Davey's just coming in. I'm being paired with him for this first feud to try and help him out. The idea of maybe just try and connect a bit more with the fans. I can see his side, even though I would also say, though, I wouldn't suggest that Davey Richards be a Colt Cabana comedy wrestler or a goofball ass showing heel. Like, like those paths would have worked for him. Could he have been a bit maybe more like a Samoa Joe was? Where you show some charisma and still have that ass kicking side, maybe that would have been more his target.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's generally good advice, but I do think sometimes there are exceptions. And I do think that Davey was pretty over for a newcomer at this time. Like, I mean, the crowds took to him pretty well at the beginning.
I will say this is a match where I think you do see that Rave philosophy really, the advantages of that, because this is a match where we get a flurry of action in the final minutes, but until we get that flurry, I kind of can't believe this was 15 minutes. Like, this match to me was like the equivalent of popcorn, where you look at a bowl of popcorn and it looks like a lot of food, but when you actually like weigh it, there actually isn't much substance to it. Like, you get some early cold toilet paper comedy where he's throwing toilet paper guys. That burns a minute or two of the match. You get a long Davey Richards face in peril sequence where you get a lot of the usual embassy minimalist, I call it, offense, where they're doing very basic stuff to not get like steal focus. It's, sometimes they're just doing stuff like stomps, like really basic offense. But it's a match that can get away with all that basic stuff because people like throwing toilet paper at Jimmy Rave. They like booing him. They like Colt Cabana's comedy. And then, maybe to your point, though, they really go nuts for Davey Richards' kicks. Like, this is one of those things where he doesn't get to do a lot of his offense in this match. Maybe that's one of the things they were arguing about before the match. He doesn't go like buck wild here. But when he does throw those kicks, this is one of those times in the show where this Minnesota crowd reacts like they've never seen a guy throw hard kicks before. And again, maybe they hadn't, and they lose their friggin' minds. They'll be quiet. He'll throw a hard kick. They'll go, holy shit! We just saw a guy throw a hard kick. And in a way, this match is a similar match to the last one, where it is technically solid, follows a very basic formula you've seen a ton of, and it feels like what it is, which is a mid-card match on a B show. But yet I enjoyed this more than the last match. I would give this like an above average, in part because I feel what these guys bring to the table have more natural personality and variety than what Daniels and Claudio did. Like, you get a little bit of comedy from Colt, you get the growly hard kickery from Davey, you get a bit of the old school healing of Rave, you get like a nice little sampler of personalities here, and there's a bit more simple enjoyment in these guys just being their standard characters versus a Christopher Daniels who definitely has some charisma, but his character doesn't really do a lot of heavy lifting in his matches. His appeal is mostly just his work, where here you can enjoy a Colt match or a Rave match where they don't do a ton, but the fun is mostly just Jimmy Rave being Jimmy Rave, Colt Cabana being Colt Cabana. So, decent little mid-card match, I would say.
Yeah, I'd say I think you and I are exactly on the same page on this one. I think, the crowd reactions, I think, hurt this one a bit. They're so muted that even the Jimmy likes balls chant was weak, which, that usually gets the crowd going unfortunately. And I think the Rave and Renaro act, while I think they did a good job here, I think it definitely misses something without Prince Nana and without Daisy Hayes. I think when the whole entourage is there, there's a lot more fun to be had, with that pairing, but, I think, they did start fun, even with the whole toilet paper throwing hijinks at the beginning, even Davey got involved. Like, after Jimmy was, being mad that a fan hit him in the back with the roll, Davey snuck up on the apron and then hit him with a roll of his own. They got a lot of mileage out of that. So I could say that, I don't think Davey shied away from it too badly. It was also funny to hear, Davey called one of the hottest newcomers in ROH because, he'd only been there for about a little less than 3 months at this point. But in our timeline, we felt like we've been reviewing his matches forever at this point. So it's just funny how slow we go compared to how fast the shows are. But yeah, I think that like you said, this was just it was a mid-card match on a B show. But because the personalities are more dynamic, and because Davey Richards' offense is more dynamic, and even some of Jimmy Rave's offense is pretty dynamic, the match felt a lot more dynamic than the previous match, even though the other match was probably technically just as good. But yeah, it was a perfectly fine wrestling match without much heat that felt very slight and felt very low stakes. And I missed Prince Nana and Daisy Hayes.
And I do want to add that I would probably undersell the quality of the action a little bit. Like, there was some good, decent action here. Like, I particularly like Sal Renaro. He hit this great drop kick right to Davy's head, and then he did a big dive over the top rope to Davy on the floor, which caught Davy really high and looked like it probably absolutely sucked to catch. So there was some fun bits of action. I agree with you too. We missed the Nana, and Daisy Hayes. In fact, but normally when the guys aren't brought to the like Midwest, they just don't acknowledge it, or they acknowledge it very minorly. Prazak actually makes a point during this match to go, we don't know why Prince Nana or Daisy Hayes aren't here tonight, and we'll have to look into it, which I think is, we're kind of foreshadowing that Prince Nana is not long for the Ring of Honor world at this point. He's going to be gone pretty soon. So, the other thing I want to point out, there was at one point one fan that just kept screaming, "You suck!" in a blood-curdling scream. I'm not even going to attempt to replicate at Jimmy before the match. It was just frightening. If you watch the show, take note of that. Before I go to the Wade's review, Matt, I got a really important question that came to my mind. I might have asked this before. I don't think I have. This is a question that can't wait. It has to be asked, Matt. So, a lot of toilet paper got thrown in the ring. If someone offered, the students collect the toilet paper afterwards. If someone said, "Hey, Matt, you could have like an entire garbage bag full of these toilet paper rolls for your home use," would you use toilet paper that was thrown in a wrestling ring? This is a very important question.
Like, would I use toilet paper that had already been thrown in the wrestling ring?
Yeah, like it looks clean. You don't know where it's been. It did touch the ring. Would you use that on your holiest of holies? No pun intended. It's free toilet paper. I mean, it doesn't look like it's been used.
I mean, Trevor, as you know, I'm a pretty big germaphobe. But, yes, I would just throw out the top couple layers. That's it. And then I'd use it.
I was thinking I would, except what if it landed on its side? Then you can't really do it. Everything's been contaminated at that point. So I'm not sure. I actually might be more germaphobe than you on this one.
Yeah, I think you are.
Shocking twist.
I think you are. Listen, I don't want to get into the biology, but it's not typically like, if there's like dirt on a piece of toilet paper, it's going to cause you to get an anal infection.
I might get pregnant from it, Matt. I have to be careful.
Wait, what's going on in those ROH rings? Jeez.
Question also for anyone that's listening that would have knowledge. We do have ROH alumni that have listened. What happened to that toilet paper? # what happened to that TP?
I'm gonna guess that most of it was thrown in the garbage.
Freeze are weeping. Anyway. We will go to Wade Keller's review. Matt, if you like adorable Wade Keller, you laughed at the last one. Wait till you get a little of this one.
So good.
Wade Keller's review of this match. Colt is every substitute teacher's nightmare, as he used his humor and wit to draw even more pouty-faced frustration out of Rave. Geander Rave's skit is one of the highlights of attending an ROH event for a fan. When Richards got in a string of offense against Renaro, Colt proudly said, "He's my partner." I think it was after a flying shoulder tackle that the crowd chanted, "That was awesome." Rave yelled back at them, looking like Dad had just sided against him in a sandbox argument with his brother, exclaiming, "It was just a shoulder tackle." Rave was the best heel I've ever seen live at doing this style of comedy crowd interaction. He wasn't campy, you really believed everything was getting under his skin, and Colt was the perfect instigator. In the end, Cabana made Renaro tap out. Really fun match, but also really good wrestling. Richards really came across as a ring technician who would have fit in during the Malenko Benoit Guerrero ECW era. I gave the match ring a boost for the crowd interaction by Cabana and Rave, 3.25 stars.
I could definitely imagine this match being a lot more fun live, especially when you don't see these guys all the time. I was pretty spoiled by just, it was not a big deal to see Colt Cabana and Jimmy Rave do their thing because I'd seen it a bajillion times even by this point. So there's a lot of matches on these B shows where it's like, this would be really fun live, but on DVD, it's just like, they're playing to the crowd that I'm not in.
So After the match, the Briscoes come back out with Jay Briscoe again on the mic. He asks Davey, what in the Sam Hill is your problem? You keep teaming up with people that take on us, the Briscoes. First you teamed up with Kenta, then Matt Sydal, and now tomorrow night you're going to team up with Homicide against us. Jay says Richards thinks he's the next big thing in Ring of Honor, but he's nothing but next on the hit list. Davey gets a mic himself and says everyone didn't come to the show tonight to see two rednecks talk. They came to see some ass kicking, and he challenges them, get in the ring right now for some ass kicking. The Briscoes start to do just that. They start to walk to the ring when the Ring of Honor students stop them. And then Davey at this point just dives to the floor on top of everybody. Davey gets into a brawl with the Briscoes that goes into the crowd as Colt Cabana, his tag partner for the night, just watches calmly. He doesn't try to get involved or anything. And then as the Briscoes and Davey are pulled apart, there's some silence. And just before they cut away from the segment, you hear one fan referencing the tights, the trunks that the Briscoes are wearing, scream out clear as day, quote, fuck the Confederacy. So yeah, this was one of the early shows where the Briscoes sported their Confederate flag their trunks, and kudos to that fan. Fuck the Confederacy. We can all get behind that.
I think so.
Next, we get an ad for an FIP DVD, Heatstroke 06, Night 1. First off, I love the idea of a show called Heatstroke. Like, that's just such a funny, it kind of sounds bad until you think what Heatstroke really is.
It's also problematic when you've heard stories of indie wrestling shows over the years.
Yeah, there's been a lot of wrestling shows that could have been called Heatstroke, but what I love about this ad, Matt, is it's like a highlight video, and it features almost no wrestling action. Instead, most of this highlight video promoting by Heatstroke 06 Night 1 is Bryan Danielson arguing with various fans in the front row of these sparsely attended show, including a group of girls who brought a sign to the show comparing Bryan Danielson's skin whiteness to Casper the Friendly Ghost. So, it was go see Heatstroke 06, because you'll get to see Bryan Danielson argue with fans. That was the selling point. So, Heatstroke 06.
Hey, I guess there are worse selling points.
We cut next to Colt Cabana backstage. Colt says after tonight's win, he's got one more agenda tonight, which is to sit and watch and study Bryan Danielson versus Nigel McGuinness tonight, because no matter what, he's being Bryan Danielson tomorrow night for himself in their scheduled match. He says he's going to do it for himself, his friends, his family, and his city. Gabe then does his classic say cut, but the camera keeps rolling promo technique, and Jimmy Jacob walks in to congratulate Colt. Colt gives him this really dismissive, what do you want from me? To Jimmy. Jimmy says, I just want to know about the Lacey and you rumors. I heard about a car rocking. Colt sings some of the Ballad of Lacey to Jimmy. Then he mocks Jimmy. He tells him, don't worry about it. He says, Jimmy, your self-esteem is way down here. We need to get it way up here.
He also keeps calling him weird.
Yeah, he's just very dismissive of the guy.
I don't like seeing Colt like this. Just as the bully jock. I don't know. I mean, I don't know him. It's not how he came across in the art of wrestling as his actual personality. So, and he was still a baby face. So I don't know. I didn't like seeing mean bully Colt.
This is a feud where everyone comes off bad at different points. As we talked about, in the early stages, the Jimmy Jacobs early promos, while they were funny and fantastic, also came off as a very creeper, stalker, kind of in a gross way.
I mean, yeah, Lacey, and his character still is that, by the way.
Yeah. And Lacey comes off as a very angry, mean, abusive authority figure to Jimmy. And now Colt's coming off as a very dismissive kind of bullying jock, where he's just like, hey, kid, haha, and just kind of enjoying how much Jimmy is being bothered and psychologically tormented.
Look at this little freak in my class, who likes the girl that I'm dating. Yeah, it's weird because you'd think just normal good guy Colt would be like, yeah, I'm dating Lacey, just you have to accept it, guy, something like that, as opposed to this weird.
You see the way she treats you, you can't put up with this man, and instead it's just like, haha, look at this loser. But
yeah,
either way, that brings us to Matt Sydal defeating a Delirious via pinfall in 16 minutes, 22 seconds after he hit the moonsault belly to belly superplex. Matt, what did you think about this? Obviously, they brought up before, this is a rematch from their first match ever in Ring of Honor. It happened in this very building 2.5 years earlier. They get a chance now, a lot more time this time to really go for it. What'd you think about this?
Yeah, well, it did feel more important because of the promos. It just goes to show promos make a match feel more important funny how that works. Another funny thing I noticed, during the entrances, like they do sometimes, they show clips of their previous matches. So they showed a clip of the Do or Die 2 match from right before, I think, Reborn completion, and also the Reborn Stage 1 match. And for some reason, they showed the clip of the second match first. I don't know why they would do it non-chronologically, but they did for whatever reason. During the match, Sydal, or like before the match actually, when Sydal is trying to decide if he was going to shake Delirious's hands, was kind of like, he doesn't really bother doing it, but he does do a really funny thing where when Delirious loses his mind at the bell, Sydal screams and runs away, which is just not a role you see Sydal in. So I enjoyed that. And I also enjoyed Sydal being like, you should take some pills or something. Like, Sydal was really feeling it on the show in terms of personality. I also thought there was some unusual camera work here. Like, when Sydal had an when Sydal had a side headlock on Delirious, the camera, basically was in an extreme close-up. And you don't see that very often, and I thought it looked pretty cool. But the downside is, I think that there was very little crowd reaction, especially for some of that early mat work and stuff. Even they do a whole thing where they do a series of reversals, arm drags, and you could tell it was a shtick that they've done probably in a million matches they've had together. The crowd round of applause that they were clearly trying to solicit was very muted. So I felt bad for them there. At one point, Sydal grabs the tassels and yells, "What are these?" And I was like, haven't you wrestled this guy a lot? You probably shouldn't be surprised by the tassels. I'm like, are we sure that Delirious is the one who doesn't know where he is at this point? But then, they get into just having more impact moves. Delirious hits the panic attack for 2. Gets the Cobra Clutch. He actually does a cool move where Delirious gets the Cobra Clutch on and then releases it very forcefully to the point where Sydal actually takes a flip bump that surprises and confuses the announcers. They're like, "What? Why did he flip?" It was kind of funny. There's another cool spot where Delirious hit the ropes and Sydal caught him almost immediately with a crossbody, and they both go over the top rope. And Sydal lands on the apron, and Delirious goes to the floor, but he gets his tassel stuck in the ropes. I thought that was a really cool spot. And they continue to do cool stuff, but I feel like the intensity is just a little bit lower than it should be, and I think a lot of it is just because it's kind of hard to feel your full level of motivation when the crowd is so quiet. I feel like it would really psych me out if I was wrestling a match and there was just so much silence in the room. So I don't blame them for not having the best possible match they could. I thought the coolest spot of the match was Delirious tries an up and over, but Sydal catches him on his shoulders, and Delirious spins and turns it almost into almost like a Canadian Destroyer type of head drop thing, and that actually got a pretty nice reaction. But they end up, trading pitting combos, going for their they do a bunch of head droppy stuff. Finally Delirious goes up top and Sydal catches him and goes for the standing belly to belly. But Delirious knocks him off, blocks the head scissors, but Sydal jumps up, hits the moonsault belly to belly that he won their first match in ROH with, and got the quick win. I thought that the match was a little bit slower than I'd expect. I thought the quiet crowd hurt the vibe, but I did think this was the best match on the show so far, and I thought it was a good match. I just thought it was, I was hoping for more urgency and intensity, because really at this point these two should have been putting on a great match to really show how far they've come, and this wasn't that.
Yeah, I agree here. We're simpatical again here, because for the last 2 matches, we got this very professional, classic formula, very standard kind of structured matches, but that didn't have much in the way of action. To this kind of felt like the opposite, where it's 2 guys doing every move they normally do, and they do a lot of cool moves, but there's no structure to it, and there's no real – I don't know. I've seen and enjoyed a lot of matches which are just wrestlers running through all these moves, and these 2 guys, again, particularly Sydal, do plenty of cool moves, but – with these kinds of matches, pace is important to me. Like, I feel like if you just go move, move, move with no time to think, that kind of works as that's a spot fest. When you do a match where that gives you that's just moves, but they give you time to think, you kind of have time to think about all the things that aren't in the match. Like,
especially when the crowd is quiet for all of it.
Yeah. And this is a match where it's not bam, 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 breathtaking pace. It's kind of medium, mid-tempo pace running through all their signature stuff. Like, you get that slow mat work opening, and then after that, just here's your stuff. And it made the match kind of feel more, I don't know how to describe it, like artificial, exhibition-y. I don't know exactly how to describe it. But again, there was just time to think about what wasn't there because of the pace of this match. The level of action's good. Then there's neat spots. You mentioned, I think, the two highlights, that big spinning bump Matt Sydal took, which was like so out of place. I just love sometimes when a wrestler just decides, you know what, I'm going to take like a big rotation bump on this move just because I can, because I'm that athletic. I can do it. I liked that. I liked that move you mentioned. That was almost like Canadian Destroyer-esque. It's hard to describe. The announcers didn't even really know what to call it. I think they called it like a reverse Rana. I don't even know what exactly you would call it. It's just a kind of a flippy-do head drop. I know that's not a great name for it. I want to give this like a low good, like say it's like a 3-star match, but I'm giving it like a really high above average, like right below that level, just because it might have been the crowd had a little bit, but I just felt like this was a match where they were put in a position to be kind of a show stealer with those promos referencing the history, being the third from the top, getting all this time. First match back for intermission, I think. It felt like they were in a position of like Gabe was telling them, like, go here, tear it down. And instead, it just did really feel more like I didn't feel like they were doing – these guys are a touring indie match. They have a ton of experience from each other. I didn't feel like they were – doing anything new here. Like, I didn't like this. This felt like a match they would probably do on any indie that they gave 16 minutes to. Like they were just running through a checklist of all their normal spots. They hit each one, and then that was it. Then they were done. So, yeah, maybe I'm being a little hard on it, but I don't think I'm that hard on it. So we'll go to Wade Keller, though. Wade Keller would write, this match was booked here because they had their first ROH match, a tryout at the time, 2.5 years ago, for Ring of Honor's only other St. Paul appearance. After that tryout match, as soon as Sydal got backstage, ROH booker Gabe Sapolsky asked him, are you busy tomorrow night? Indicating he wanted to add him to the next night's show in Chicago. Sydal looked like he had just been given an unexpected job promotion in the corner office at the time. Since then, both have gotten better, with Delirious especially refining his act of being a kook. This was a very good match, and the 16 minutes flew by. Lots of good mat work, some ringside fighting, and a good dose of high spots. In the end, after a believable near fall by Delirious, Sydal hit a top rope belly-to-belly suplex for the win. The two shook hands after the match, seeming to realize they were back where it all started, and were taking in how much they've done in ROH since. 3.5 stars. Oh yeah, I want to mention one other thing I thought was kind of cute, which was after Delirious kicked out of the Here It Is driver, Sydal gets mad and he shouts out, "That's my finish!" Which one? I don't know how many matches he's won with that, but again, that is kind of going to what you said. That is example, I think, of what you're talking about. Like, he's so corny, it's kind of adorable and lovable. Like him just being like, "That's my finish." I did enjoy that.
It's also funny because it's not his finish, at least not in ROH.
Yeah, that'd be like if someone had broken out of Jay Briscoe's Stretch Plum tonight and he had said, "That's my finish." It's like, no, it isn't, Matt. But luckily for him, it worked tonight. But brings us to the semi-main event, the ROH World Tag Team title match. Austin Aries and Roderick Strong successfully defend their titles when they defeat BJ Whitmer and Samoa Joe in 20 minutes, 2 seconds, when Strong pins Samoa Joe after he hits a Gibson driver. So first off, I guess we're continuing, like, Matt, how many times now has Samoa Joe and a random partner tried to go for the tag team titles? Like, just like the 800th time? Like, that's something we should have had a counter for. We had the man-on-woman violence counter. We should have started the Samoa Joe challenges for the tag team titles with a random partner counter. So on a show where so far most of what we've seen felt like a very B-show performance, or some matches I would argue felt like they just didn't quite click, this show I felt like desperately needed a match like this, where to me this match is right on the border of very good and great, like 3 3/4 to 4 stars. But more importantly, it's a match where I didn't feel like they were holding very much back. It's not maybe it's not their A performance, but it's like a really strong B+ performance from these 4 guys, I felt like. And it's another match, while there isn't much in the way of story, these four really matched up well stylistically, where it's four dudes who can throw hard-hitting bombs, throwing down with each other. Everyone in this match gets a sequence where they get brutalized for like at least a minute or two straight, like even Joe. And so this is a match where sometimes a match doesn't need to have a story. Like, I criticize matches for not having stories because I like matches to have stories, but I feel like sometimes a match doesn't need to have a story. It just needs to have like an identity or a flavor. This match didn't have a story, but did have an identity of guys that hit hard, throwing down. And I thought it was fun for that. I would also say this match gets credit for having a great finishing sequence where BJ Whitmer takes him and Aries out of the match when he does the old suplex a guy over the top rope to the floor, but they hold on, so I go over the top rope too. And BJ takes one of the scariest looking falls I've ever seen on one of those spots of the process.
Yeah, like right straight down on his head.
Like, I don't know if that was just something went wrong or if BJ Whitmer decided, like, this is my last weekend before I get surgery. I'm just going to take a really stupid risk, but it was fucking nuts. And then that leaves Strong and Joe alone in the ring. And Strong gets put in the rear naked choke, but then in a really impressive show of strength, he breaks the hold by hoisting Joe onto his shoulders, hits him in the gut buster, hits the sit kick, and then he hits a big Gibson driver for the win. And it's one of those wins where people did not expect he'd get to pin Joe. So you get that little yelp from the crowd for a half second with like, what? Whoa. And then they pop, which I thought was really cool. Another thing I love about that moment too is Joe goes up really heavy on the Gibson driver, like he just rotates just enough. And it's one thing I love about Joe is how heavy he goes up for the rare moves when he leaves his feet. Like he does that also earlier in the match where Strong gets him up for a back suplex, where for a lot of people, a back suplex is just a normal move. Like you go, oh, that's a fine move. But because Joe doesn't leave his feet that often, he goes up so heavy and he always comes down looking like he just barely got into a safe position. You go, holy shit, that seemed like a big match, like a big deal in this match. I will say there was a missed opportunity in this match. Aries has his ribs taped up from the legit rib injury he suffered on the UK double shot. And early on, we get one extended sequence where they really work over his ribs to a surprising degree for a guy with a legit injury. Like, he gets kicked in the ribs, he gets tossed around. It's good. It kind of affected me. I was like, I'm kind of into this. You could have had a whole story around that. And then after that sequence, they never really focus on the ribs again. He never really sells them seriously again. It's just us doing moves match. It's a thread they could have built into a story, but they ignored it to do the same kind of match they could do on any other night. But to their credit, the match they could do on any other night turned out to be a very good match, so I'm not going to really complain much. So yeah, I would just say again, this is a good 20 minutes of guys throwing down like B+ level effort. I guess the way I would sum it up, Matt, was I feel like there were other matches on this show where you go, oh yeah, this is like what I would expect on a B show, but you wouldn't be happy with it. And this is like on the upper limit of what you would expect on a B show. Like, I feel like if you get this on a B show, you're very happy with it. You're like, this is either meeting the very highest end of my expectations or maybe exceeding them a little bit. So I would say credit to these guys. This was, to me, the best match on the show thus far, and maybe I'll have more to add to that later.
I feel like I like this a bit less than you. I do think it was the best match on the show so far, definitely. And I thought that the finishing sequence was awesome. But there was, you could tell, like, I'd say it was, for some of the match, maybe it wasn't even quite their B+ level. Like there were like consecutive chin locks at one point. Joe was like tagging in, then tagging out a lot. There was a spot that my pet peeve spot where Whitmer is beaten down for a while. He tags in Joe for the hot tag, and then he gets tagged back in himself like very shortly thereafter. I never liked that. But, the crowd is definitely hot for Joe versus Aries. I thought that both Strong and Joe certainly brought their A game when it comes to chops. Early in the match, there was a spot where like Whitmer and Strong do some reversals and do spots where they try to do like the flip over and land on my feet thing, and they both kind of don't quite land on their feet. But that's okay. There was also another spot that I enjoyed where Whitmer is working over Aries' ribs. Then he tags in Joe and he yells "ribs, ribs," which probably meant he wanted Joe to attack Aries' ribs, but maybe it meant that he wanted to eat ribs and was hoping that Joe would give him some. But
yeah, ribs is just a really objectively funny thing to yell out.
Yes, ribs. But it did happen. But yeah, no, that final sequence with the big back suplex, that was awesome. And, like him getting backdropped by Joe onto Whitmer on the floor. Then the senton and the heat-seeking missile by Aries and the missile drop kick right into Strong's clutches. That was an awesome sequence. The chop brainbuster combo on Whitmer, the Joe Whitmer lariat backdrop combo on Strong. All that. I mean, they just were really running through it. So, I mean, if the last 3 minutes of a match can make or break a match, they definitely made this match, and it turns it into something very good. But I didn't really like it as much for most of the duration. It was almost a cliche of some of these ROH matches, like flipping a switch in the last few minutes. And I'd say even more pronounced than usual because the early part I thought was a little bit dull. And the final stretch was just like so great, like the final stretch of a 4.5-star match, And yeah. I think the rest of the match was dull enough, at least for me, that it brought it to, I'd say, below 4 stars. But still, that final sequence is awesome. That Gibson driver, by the way, that Strong won with, was like a top-tier Gibson driver, and it was a great finish.
Yeah.
So definitely the match of the night so far.
And again, now it's going to build to like a little mini Joe Strong feud where they're going to have a singles match in a couple shows. Like when does that ever happen in wrestling? Samoa Joe and Roderick Strong. But I also will point out this might be the image I end up using for the show this episode, because very rare that people make signs for Ring of Honor shows, and someone made a sign that Joe holds up. He's so happy with it during his entrance that says, "Rest in peace, Austin Aries and Roderick Strong. Cause of death, Samoa Joe." And he's just like, I managed to get a screen cap where he just looks so satisfied, like smugly, like in an adorable way, like, yeah, look at this sign. Yeah, I'm going to kill these guys. It was just I enjoyed it. Wade Keller liked this match more than either of us, Matt. I'll go to his review. He wrote, "That's so classy of Joe to put over an ROH up-and-comer, knowing it won't affect his future in TNA or eventually WWE, but it can do wonders for elevating Strong. Joe was really good, but there was a noticeable economy to his performance in this match, not killing himself or trying to get in every signature spot of his.
I definitely agree with that.
Overall, a very good tag match. A good match to show a wrestling fan who thinks the best tag wrestling gets is America's Most Wanted matches, which are good but not great, or WWE's tag division, which could be very good but aren't given the chance. 4.25 stars. So Wade liked this quite a bit. And now, after the match, Prazak screams how Strong just pinned Samoa Joe, which does put it over as a big deal. Like they're really acting like this is a big deal. He then also keeps pushing the mystery of who stole Aries and Strong's title belts, and then later returned them to them. So Dave Prazak not reading Chris Hero's live journal. The crowd chants, "That was awesome." Next, we join Christopher Daniels backstage, who says he's heard all the talk amongst fans that he doesn't seem to think that don't seem to think that he has a clear direction these days in Ring of Honor. Daniels says his goals have always been clear. He wants to be a champion in Ring of Honor once again, and tomorrow night he and Matt Sydal challenge Aries and Strong for the tag team titles. Gabe then again does the cut gimmick. Camera keeps rolling. Jimmy Jacobs wanders into frame. He asks Daniels if he's seeing where Lacey is. Daniels is about to answer, and then he kind of catches himself and he tells Jimmy Jam, as Daniels calls him, it's not my place to tell you. I'm going to let you find out for yourself. Jimmy then walks away in the classic Ring of Honor style where whatever the guy needs to see is about 6 feet away from where they are naturally. So he walks about the 6 feet to the shower stalls where he finds Colt Cabana and Lacey making out in the shower stalls, fully clothed, which, that's what you do. And I wrote my notes, Matt. Didn't Colt just say in his promo that he was going to study Danielson's match tonight and how important it was for him to study it? And now here he is right before the match making out with Lacey.
That is a very good point.
Very relatable. We have important things in life and then women.
Well, sometimes, you have important jobs to do, like either watching a wrestling match or being a Congress person, and you're just caught doing sex stuff with people on camera. And it's a problem.
I have definitely blown off things much more important than wrestling for the love of a woman.
I'm Trevor. I'm making a pop culture or current events reference, I should say.
Oh, I just ruined it. I'm not going to get the Matt F trophy this episode, am I? But anyway, Lacey says they've got more to focus on. They've got to focus on more important things. You know, you can't let Jimmy. We can't freak out. We got to focus on more important things, like Colt winning a title for Lacey's Angels. And Colt seems both confused and bemused for this. Like, he's just like, Lacey's Angels. Like, you think I'm part of this? And then the two of them walk away as Jimmy breaks down and collapses in the showers. So
I feel like I just cut off what would have been a good Trevor Dame story, and I think we need to hear it now.
No, I was just because I've probably done this anecdote before. The first time I realized I was ever in love, and this is so sad. This is the most sad thing was I ordered Royal Rumble 2001 on pay-per-view. I was going to watch it live, and then my girlfriend showed up and was like, "Hey, I want to hang out." And then I had my mom tape it for me, and I was like, man, I'm not going to see the Royal Rumble live. And then I thought, I don't care. She's better than the Royal Rumble. And then I thought, Trevor, you're in love. And I was like, oh, God. And I was like, I remembered even the moment realizing this is a really sad way to realize you're in love with somebody, to be like, but it's a big deal. I'm not watching the 2001 Royal Rumble.
The 2001 Royal Rumble was one of the WWE's best pay-per-views at that point. Are you sure she was better?
You know what, Matt? She was. She was.
Well, then you found someone special, and I guess lost them. So good job. God
damn you, Matt. You're not making the TWD 500 this week. I can tell you that much. But Ring of Honor World Title, best 2 out of 3 falls, main event. Bryan Danielson, the champion, successfully defends the title when he goes to a 1 hour, 1 fall time limit draw. Bryan Danielson was able to pin Nigel in 25 minutes, 19 seconds with a small package. Then Nigel was able, or as I wrote in my notes, Nigel McGuinness made Bryan Danielson submit to a random arm submission, maybe that arm submission in 38:55.
It was not that arm submission, but I'll get to it.
And then they went to the time limit draw in 60 minutes. There is a quote from Why do I keep making Bryan Danielson? There was a quote from Bryan Danielson in his book.
Oh,
yes, by Daniel Bryan.
You're gonna take my spot of the
Matt,
book.
no, the floor is yours. It is just a brief quote, but do you want to give the quote? Let's set the tale by before we say what we thought of this. What does Bryan Danielson think of this match?
So I had started reading the paragraph where he talks about his series of hour-long matches on the Fight of the Century episode. Where he said he doesn't remember anything about the Samoa Joe match. He does remember something about the Nigel McGuinness match, which is, quote, the second hour-long match was against Nigel in St. Paul, Minnesota. It was probably the worst of all the matches Nigel and I had against each other, and he got a concussion to boot. Everything about it was regrettable. End quote.
So I will say this. I am fascinated you're going to get to go first. I am fascinated to what you think about this match because I have some pretty strong feelings about this match, and I was surprised. I probably wrote more for like my little note review of this match, like just my thoughts of this match than I expected, more than most matches on Through the Years history. And Bryan Danielson has strong thoughts, as you just read. So what do you think about this 60-minute time limit draw?
Well, I certainly don't think everything about it was regrettable. Obviously, some things. Nigel McGuinness getting a concussion is, in fact, regrettable. So I remember on the Fight of the Century episode, we were talking with Phil Schneider about how Danielson said that in his 60-minute matches during this era, he didn't put a lot of forethought into them and didn't plan peaks and valleys the way he would now. And he just kind of went out there and did it. And this is definitely more so than in the Joe match, a match where you can tell. There were points late in this match where they were just like very clearly repeating stuff and killing time. And that was a little bit sad because you don't really see that much in Danielson matches. But I will say, I thought the first fall of this match was a hoot and a half. The first fall of this match mostly revolved around Bryan Danielson working a headlock for a really long time and fooling around with the crowd while he did it, to the point where the crowd started popping huge every time he locked in the headlock. There was one point early in the match where Danielson locks in a headlock and a guy yells, boring. And Danielson gets a huge smile on his face and he goes, that's right. All my offense is boring, so fuck off, which gets a nice little pop. He eventually, he does variations of the headlock, turns it into a cravat. Whenever he gets the hold broken, he grabs it again. He really locks it on super tight. And like at certain points, he grapevines Nigel's arms and legs with his legs so he could lock in the headlock. At one point, he says, "I'm not releasing this headlock for 60 minutes, which gets a pop. But I'm thinking, did he just give away that this was going to go 60 minutes? But then I was like, the crowd probably figured it out. I don't think that they were kind of like shocked by that. But there was a "We love headlocks" chant. There was, you can make the critique, which I think is fair, that because they're being so goofy and clearly having so much fun, it makes it feel a lot more like a performance and less like a contest. And what nothing kind of demonstrates that more than a point where Danielson locks in a chin lock on Nigel and the crowd cheers again and chants "headlock." And Nigel yells while he's been brutalized by these headlocks for like 15 to 20 minutes and is in a chin lock. He yells, "This is a chin lock, not a headlock. Know your wrestling or learn your wrestling." And it's like, Nigel, shouldn't you be selling the fact that you're in a lot of pain right now and not goofing around?
Was that Nigel or was that a fan?
No, I think that was Nigel.
Jeez, I thought that was a fan. Oh my God.
I mean, I'll go back and look, but I'm almost positive that was Nigel who said that. While he was in the headlock, while he was in the chin lock. So, but listen, so I could definitely understand someone critiquing that whole segment, but I cannot deny that it was incredibly entertaining. And now, since Danielson is claiming this is like his year-long retirement tour and he wants to work indies and stuff, please go somewhere and do another match where he works it entirely around a headlock. I would love it. And I know there was a match that he did in PWG with Claudio, right? Where it really was literally just headlocks, right? Like that was like the whole match. Like the whole match was one uninterrupted headlock or most of it, something like that, where instead of a series, I think it was maybe just one. I'm not even sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I'd like to go back and watch that, but do that again, Danielson. Come on. The fact that you got this quiet crowd to get so into headlocks, you can do it again. I think you can. Eventually, Nigel does take control during the first fall, and he starts working on Danielson's arm and shoulder. And it's funny because he works the shoulder a lot to the point where there's a spot in the second fall where Danielson tries to get Todd Sinclair to like start yanking on his shoulder to pop it back into place. And it's like, isn't that so like uncanny that they work this match with like him separating his shoulder when he famously really separates his shoulder early in the 60-minute match the very next night? Yeah, that's insane. And apparently he did have like a real separated shoulder, I think, before he separates it the next night. So it's like, did he will this into existence? Like, is this some kind of like self-karma or something? Yeah, I guess maybe the fact that the shoulder was already vulnerable made it more likely to happen during the unfortunate spot the next night. But yeah, so I really enjoyed this first sequence. Nigel does some cool stuff with the with the arm. He does an anaconda vice actually at one point. And it's interesting because it's a long headlock sequence followed by a long arm work sequence by Nigel. There's like almost no back and forth, which makes it a very unique match because ROH matches in particular have a lot of back and forth. There's especially the tag matches, but even the singles matches. This first fall is just one guy dominates for a really long time. The other guy dominates for a really long time. And eventually Danielson, hits a drop kick to break up Nigel's momentum. And then he hits a tope where he actually lands like sitting on top of the guardrail, which is, I don't know if I've ever seen someone land on a tope like that. So that was unique. But, they continue to work. Danielson actually hits a Thez press. And then he locks in the label lock, which I think that's the first time I've ever seen him, I'd ever seen him do that hold. Can you remember him doing the label lock before that? I definitely had that reaction like, whoa, this is like 10 years later, Bryan Danielson. Yeah, it was weird. But, so the first fall is fun. And, Danielson eventually wins by just like, Nigel grabs his boot, flips him over. Danielson lands on his feet and locks in the small package and gets the win. I thought that was a great first fall. I had no complaints about the first fall at all. And then, I know I could see somebody having a complaint that it was just too lackadaisical or not like serious enough for a world title match, but It was fine. Like, I don't mind that at all at this point. They've worked so many matches. Let them do something like that. So now in the second fall, it becomes a little bit more hard hitting. Nigel can't really get a solid comeback going because Danielson hits a lot of slaps. He looks really dominant here. Danielson does the surfboard or teases it, does the figure four. He gets on Nigel's shoulders, and Nigel actually climbs up 2 turnbuckles and hits an electric chair drop, locks in a key lock, and Danielson makes it to the ropes. But then Danielson tries to repeat the spot from the second match they had against each other where he crawls underneath the ring and sneaks up behind Nigel. And instead of hitting another small package, he hits a missile drop kick to the back. But Nigel walks into the rebound lariat. Danielson kicks out, but Nigel locks in another key lock and gets the tap out. Which I thought this was a pretty good fall too. Yeah, I don't think I was waiting for Nigel to put on that arm submission. I don't think he ever actually does in this match. But I enjoyed the finishing sequence of that fall. I think it's actually the third fall where things start to go a little bit wonky because there was like 20 minutes left in the match. And it felt like maybe they were hoping they were going to be less than 20 minutes. Like they do some big spots, Nigel does a hip toss out of the corner, then another. He does the headstand, but Danielson actually hits a headbutt into the upside down Nigel, which was like kind of a wow spot. Danielson hits the belly to back superplex, does a cattle mutilation. Nigel gets his foot on the bottom rope. And then the momentum stops. The crowd gets quiet again. Danielson does, I'd say, his third or fourth, like, slapping Nigel sequence, where Nigel tries to come back with weak slaps of his own. And so Danielson, like, knocks his hand into Nigel's nose, busts it open. I think it was actually already busted open, locks in a chin lock. One thing I will note about this, as Danielson continues to work the headlocks and the chin locks and, like, bust Nigel's nose, Nigel really does look like he's been in a real fight. Like, his face just looks fucked up at this point. At one point I wrote, if he had a swollen eye, I'd say it looked like he was in a real fight. And then later in the match, he actually does get a swollen eye. So it's like, whatever you could say about this match, it was definitely brutal on Nigel. Like, he really looks messed up. And obviously you find out he has a concussion, so, I mean, he was messed up. But Danielson continues to do like a series of different leg holds, combines that with an arm hold. And at one point, Prazak says he's seemingly inventing new moves as he goes along. And that is something that Danielson does. They continue to have other slap fights. At one point, Danielson ends the slap fight by blowing snot in Nigel's face. They just go back and forth. It's like, I don't know, this final like 20 minutes, it just feels like they're like, what do we do now? And that's sad. Nigel hits the top rope straddle lariat. Then he hits some more headbutts, but Daniel starts headbutting him back. Hits a bridging straightjacket suplex for 2. Danielson hits his own Tower of London, which is, I think, the first time I can remember someone else doing that hold. Gets a 2 count off that. He goes for another diving headbutt. Nigel gets his foot up and locks in the cattle mutilation on Danielson. Danielson makes the bottom rope. Then he avoids the Tower of London, but Nigel escapes cattle mutilation, puts Danielson back up, hits the Tower of London for a good 2 count, and that's probably the best near fall pop so far. Then he goes for another top rope straddling lariat, but Danielson catches him in his arm, locks in cattle mutilation again, so that felt very contrived. Nigel makes the ropes again. Now Danielson starts kicking Nigel. Nigel catches his leg, flips him over just like they did at the end of the first fall. But this time Nigel hits a really great lariat for 2, which was a good spot. Nigel locks in the key lock again, and the ref announces there's 5 minutes left. So now this is their cue. Nigel repeatedly slaps Bryan. Bryan seems out of it, but he gets a sudden nip up, slaps Nigel, collapses again. They keep trading shots, but Nigel gets crazy on him with slaps, but tires out. So Danielson hits a roaring elbow. Nigel rebounds. Danielson hits another roaring elbow. So Nigel rebounds again, hits the rebound lariat, gets the 2 count, locks in the cattle mutilation again. Nigel does. And at this point, it's like, okay, yeah, you're definitely repeating yourselves. Nigel hits another Tower of London, again, repeating yourselves, locks in another key lock. And this is when Danielson counters, starts hitting the elbows that he won at Unified with. And I thought, good for Danielson for having the restraint to hold on to like the last minute to do those elbows. Nigel seems out of it, but Sinclair doesn't stop it, and eventually Nigel fires up, starts hitting elbows of his own, and that's when the time limit runs out. So it was a good finish. It was a very brutal match, very hard hitting, which has made it memorable. The first fall was super memorable and different, but it just felt like they didn't have enough stuff for 60 minutes. Like there was just so much repetition that I was surprised by, and also I wish they'd had a hotter crowd. There's a fireworks going on outside. So if you hear anything, that's what it is. I don't know what they're for, but yeah, this match, I don't know. I definitely don't think it was bad. Like I think it was in a lot of ways really good because they're both really good, but it probably didn't need to be an hour. And I guess what I value about this match is they did something very different because they could. And sometimes I like different for the sake of different. And I'd say, at least for part of this match, it was different for the sake of different.
So I agree on a lot of points. I wonder, once I finish talking, how my final feelings will be. But there's a lot to say about this match. So let me start with the good. I'll go with the things I like first. I think you could show me almost any isolated 5-minute chunk from any point in this match, and it would look like a match I would want to see. And some 5-minute chunks you could pull from this match would, again, in isolation, look like a match I would say I absolutely have to see this match. This looks incredible. These are two fantastic wrestlers, top-level pros who have quite a bit of experience with each other at this point, obviously. They're sharing a ring for an hour. There's a floor to that's very high, even at their worst, which I'm going to give a spoiler. I think this is I agree with Danielson. I think this is their worst match. I still think there's a floor to that. That's really high. This match also, they had the stip going into this match. This was Nigel's last challenge for the ROH World title as long as Bryan is champ. So the 2 out of 3 fall draw gives you kind of a cute twist to it where, Nigel doesn't lose, but he also doesn't win. And because of the stip, he can't challenge again. So it's a way to keep him kind of strong, but also end the feud in a way. This would end up being their last singles match against each other for 9 months. So within this match, it does in some ways kind of feel like a feud ender. There's like a lot of callbacks to their entire feud, which in one sense does make it like a good capper to the feud they've had. Like Bryan, like you've mentioned a lot of these, but like Bryan does the crawl under the ring and come out the other side to surprise your opponent trick. He beat Nigel within a previous match, except this time, instead of the small package, goes for the drop kick. Nigel uses the momentum to turn it into a rebound lariat for a near fall. And then when he kicks out of the near fall, he does the arm submission to get the win. The fall. So that's a nice little callback that Nigel has figured, he doesn't fall to it this time. They do the callback to the infamous ring post head ram spot where Nigel tries to do it to Bryan. It's blocked. Bryan tries to do it to Nigel. It's blocked. Then Nigel rams Danielson's arm into the ring post, which starts that whole series of arm work that will play throughout the rest of the match. Bryan does his big springboard dive into the crowd, and just like the match that Nigel won by countout, he pulls up a chair at the last second for Danielson to hit into on the dive, except of course Danielson survives this one. Nigel even does like a mini version, I would say, of the Liverpool match Hulk up, but this time Bryan just takes him down, puts him in a headlock. Like, I know what's coming. I'm not going to let you get all the way ramped up. I'm just going to take you down. So this match was full, and then even the very end obviously is a big callback where Nigel survives the elbows that beat him in Liverpool, and then puts Bryan in them as time expires. So I loved. Basically, this was like a love letter to all their old matches in terms of callbacks. And as you might expect for a big feud wrap up, this is also, like you mentioned, a match where they were doing each other's moves. Like Nigel does the cow mutilation quite a bit in this match. Bryan does the Tower of London, like you mentioned. So, sometimes I feel wrestlers can overdo we do each other's stuff, but I felt like in a match like this, at the end of a feud going for an hour, it felt earned, and I got a kick out of seeing them do each other's stuff. And this match also had a fair share of something I like in long matches, which is wrestlers forced to do things they rarely or never do because they just need to fill the time. Like, how often do you see Bryan Danielson do a Thez press? I think I've seen him once or twice on Through the Years before this, do a Thez press. How often do you see Nigel do the electric chair drop off the second turnbuckle? Maybe once before this in Ring of Honor. Even like you mentioned, the the headstand headbutt where Nigel does the headstand and Danielson just flies in with a headbutt. That was a crazy new thing. And then going to what you said, I think my favorite part of this match is that first 20 minutes. I think that's an absolute masterclass from Bryan Danielson. I think, like lots of long matches, it starts with slow mat work. And after just 4 minutes of this match, I looked at the time, someone starts chanting boring. And it's one person, the crowd turns on them. And I've talked about Bryan Danielson doing this kind of thing before, where so many wrestlers, when they get heckled, they either panic and start like really going to quick spots quickly, like, oh shit, I gotta win this crowd over, or they just ignore it and it gets kind of awkward. Bryan Danielson is such a pro. He doesn't do that. He leans into it and he makes it, he makes that fan the focus of the next 20 minutes of the match, where I'm going to headlock this guy, Nigel, all the time. I'm going to rub it in that fan's face. I'm going to keep calling out that fan, as you mentioned, all the different things about that he mentioned, personal.
So you think that the headlock thing was a direct result of what that fan said? You don't think it was what his plan was?
I don't think I'm guessing his plan was, to do slow mat work to start. And once he saw that one fan didn't like it, I think he decided, I'm going to lean into this. And then you'll notice when he first does the headlocks in the first 2 or 3 minutes, like the fans are polite, but they're quiet, and it's only after he starts getting on that fan and really playing it up that the fans then start, like you were saying, go crazy for it. They start popping for the headlock. They start requesting the headlock. So I think he probably my guess, I don't know this for a fact, my guess is, based on the way he worked it, is he leaned into it way more, because once he realized, if I kind of shove it in this fan's face, everyone else now loves this. It's usually over.
I still think it was part of the plan, because that first headlock where the fan yelled boring, he was like really clamping it on like a vice and like not letting him release it, and like even before the fan yelled at. So I think you're right, he might have like played it up for the fan, but I think he's still planning on working a lot, like a headlock centric fall. But who knows? Maybe not. Danielson obviously doesn't remember one way or the other, because he thought everything about the match was regrettable.
I will say, though, whether you're right or I'm right or whatever, I'm not even confident in my theory here. I think it is like these are one of the kind of things where this is definitely not close to Bryan Danielson's best match, but these are the kind of things I think of when I think of Bryan Danielson as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, because I think it's a masterclass, that first 20 minutes, and you take something you take a heckle, you take a very boring move, and you turn to maybe the thing that the fans want most, that's giving them like a huge kick, is because you turn, like the headlock is just a headlock, but he made it mean something. He made it mean, I'm imposing my will. I'm sticking it to this fan. I'm showing everybody, I'm going to wrestle the way I want to wrestle. And he did it with such personality and just inventiveness. He turned it into the absolute highlight. So those are the good things. Now let's talk about the bad things. So through the years, we've seen a bunch of 60-minute matches, Matt. We saw the 4-way Iron Man match, crowning a champion. We saw Joe versus Punk 1 and 2. We saw Arias versus Danielson at Testing the Limit, which went well over 60. We saw Punk versus Christopher Daniels, and we just rewatched Joe versus Danielson in the draw. I can tell you, Matt, having watched this match, of all those 60-minute matches, and you touched on this, I have never seen a 60-minute match in Ring of Honor that felt more nakedly like two guys desperately trying to fill the time than this match. Like, even on one of the Joe Punk matches, which we love, Joe talked in that ROH Shoot interview where he was like, at one point in that match, I was just out of ideas. Like, I was glad the fan heckled me because it gave me something to do for a minute. I will say that match doesn't feel close to this match in terms of a match where it feels like people ran out of ideas. And I know people are going to say
the only match that came close that we watched was Daniels versus Punk. But even that, I would say not as much.
Like, I know some people might say, Trevor, aren't all 60-minute matches full of just guys desperately trying to fill time? Or they might even say, Trevor, like, aren't all wrestling matches, period, guys trying to fill time? You might even say, Trevor, isn't all of life just people trying to desperately find random ways to fill time? And I would say yes to all three of those things. But what I would add, Matt, is I think in wrestling, time passes smoother and more pleasurably in wrestling when there's some continuity, when it doesn't just feel like you're seeing 15 minutes of disconnected spots, even though, again, you could argue wrestling is just a stunt show like that. But I think either you want to be bam, 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 so fast and exciting you can't think which again, you can't do that in a 60-minute match. You can't go at that pace for 60 minutes. Or you want some kind of story. You want to build some momentum. You want like something that has a beginning, middle, and end, or like you were saying, how Danielson would learn later to build in like peaks and valleys into something, a smooth pace even that just ramps up and peaks at the very end. This match, I don't feel any of that. There's those fun callbacks. There's that fun masterwork kind of slow start with the headlocks, but everything in this match to me felt disconnected. Like, you get minutes of slow mat work, then you get minutes of big moves, and then it's back to the mat work in a way that feels random. You get these big strike standoffs that are supposed to feel epic, and I feel if they had built them, they would have felt epic, but they don't feel like these big climactic moments of the match. They just feel like random moments in the match, like, oh, here's something else we can do. This will kill all another minute. Even like 15 minutes left in the match, where the match is starting to build to what you think is the hot end, then Danielson just puts Nigel back in like a random ass submission out of nowhere. And it just, everything about this match just feels like, and then you point out near the end, how many times they just repeat like finishers. And I know that was
slap fights and the Tower of London, and it's like, all right, we just saw this, yeah.
Yeah, and I know Nigel would start to be a guy who would repeat he would kind of spam his finishers, but this felt different than that. This was two guys, I definitely agree with you. This felt like two guys who were just like, we still got that much time left? Like, fuck, I guess we can do this again. We can do this again. We can do this again. And for guys, especially Danielson, both these guys I think are amazing wrestlers, but especially Danielson, who I think is one of the greatest of all time, that he was just at such a loss. Like, I've rarely seen him. Like, one thing you usually can't say about Bryan Danielson is he's not inventive enough. And here it's like, yeah, he's just out of ideas and nothing's really holding together. And even like the Joe Danielson match we just watched, which I think is a better match than this, we agreed it wasn't like a match of the year level, but they came up with like a nice solution to that match where it was like 2 half-an-hour matches where they kind of slowly ramped up, and just when it felt like it was getting to like the hot stretch run at the 30-minute mark, they had one of the guys get like hurt, and then they had the other guy work on that injury, and they slowly ramped the match up for the next 30 minutes. So they basically worked the match twice.
Which is what Danielson did in that first 60-minute match against Adam Page too, where like the first half of the match was what it was, and then the second half there was, Page was bleeding, and then it was like, okay, like now we have this to work around in our second half. It's like, it's a smart way to do something.
Yeah, it's a classic way to work a 60-minute match, to kind of break it down to 2 30-minute matches. But this match doesn't do that. This match is like all over the place. It's like, it's slow, then here's like a real hot sequence, then a little bit slow again. And again, nothing feels like it's building towards the next thing. It just feels like two guys thinking, shit, what can we do next? How about we do this? Okay, let's do it. And again, because they're fantastic wrestlers, moment to moment, there's a lot of fun moments in it. The work looks really good. I mean, these are two excellent wrestlers. But yeah, I've never seen a 60-minute match in Ring of Honor where there's no real forward thrust. It feels it's just two really talented wrestlers doing things they can do for 60 minutes in a really messy, discombobulated kind of way. And even listen to the fans, like, this crowd has been weird the whole night, but if you listen to them, it does feel like even by the end of the match, like, they never turn on the match other than that 1 or 2 fans, but it does feel like they're not even getting as much out of the big sequences near the end as they would have maybe at the start of the match. Like, it does feel like this crowd's kind of like, oh, this has been a lot. They're getting good reactions, but not great reactions like I think they would have gotten later. So I guess how I would sum this up is, it's hard for me to know how to rate this match because, again, this is a match where if you watch any moment in isolation, I think it's enjoyable. There are moments within this match I love. The first 20 minutes have that Danielson performance that you and I think both agree is really great, but it just doesn't build to be larger than the sum of its parts. And in a 60-minute match, it's a match that's just parts, that's a lot of parts, man. That's a lot. That's kind of a slog. To me, this match ended up being, it felt like the best I could compare it to is, this is like a match where you go on a long trip to go to a destination and you have fun at the destination, but when you get back home, you're like, I had fun, but it wasn't worth the trip. Like, it wasn't worth staying at the hotel. It wasn't worth all the driving. Like, there was fun moments there. And I think that's what I would give this is like a strong good, maybe a very low, very good, but probably just a strong good. I'd give it like a 3.5 star match, but I would have a hard time recommending this match because I'd just be like, there's fun. It's not worth the trip. That's the best way I would put it. It's not worth the trip. But let's get some opinions from other people. The Observer, Dave wrote, based on live reports, the idea was to establish Danielson as a throwback to the old school NWA champions. The matches on August 25th in St. Paul against Nigel McGuinness and the next night in Chicago against Colt Cabana had some detractors because of the slow starts, but most of the response we got was very favorable. There were some boring chants at Danielson versus McGuinness when he worked out of a side headlock for a long period of time. It took on a life of its own as fans started yelling at the fans chanting boring and thus would chant for the lengthy headlock. By the end, it was a great match. It's kind of funny because, again, it sounds like Matt, like, one of our favorite parts of the match is the part that in this live report's like, well, it got to be great by the end. To me, you and me, I feel like the fun's the first 20. Like, that's the part that has a lot of color to it.
Yeah, I have a feeling like that sort of wouldn't have been the consensus, what Dave wrote there. It wouldn't have been the consensus of the live crowd.
And then, Matt, I know you get, if anyone gets a bigger kick out of me about like the adorable Wadeisms and little things that capture Wade's imagination, it's you. You had one of the best Matt laughs earlier to one of the Wade things that was so adorable. I think we might top it, Matt. The best Wade is for last. I saved it here. I might start. Okay, I'm overhyping it, but let's go to this. Wade Keller's review of this match. Danielson spent the majority of the first half of the match applying headlocks, but he should have a T-shirt that says "No ordinary headlocks." Matt, he thinks they should have a T-shirt that says "No ordinary headlocks." Like, who would buy that? Who would buy a shirt that says "No ordinary headlocks"?
Also, like, what is that? I don't understand. Like, how does that even make sense? What does that have to do with anything?
He didn't say that during the match. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, the headlock. I mean, and they also were kind of ordinary headlocks at most of the time. Like, yeah.
So yeah, that is so Wade Keller. That is Wade never changed. That is so fucking adorable that you think he should have a shirt that says "No ordinary headlocks."
Well, I don't think Wade's ever been known for like being good at creating T-shirts.
So Wade continues, the crowd actually chanted, "That was awesome," and "Holy shit" at Danielson's headlocks. It was a new era smart fan chant that was mocking those who wouldn't appreciate Danielson's style. And there were a few hecklers in the crowd, but they got shouted down pretty quickly and decisively by the ROH faithful who knew what they came to see and were getting it. Danielson really has a knack for interacting with the crowd, but very different from how, say, Jimmy Rave does. He comes across not irritated by fans, but as if he is mentally superior to them and is not only in total control of his opponent, but is there to play psychological games with the fans.
True.
It's a different he definitely nailed like Danielson's approach there. Absolutely. It's a different dynamic than anything else I've seen. During the match, despite the deliberate pace and 2 out of 3 fall guarantee that they wouldn't miss the ultimate finish until at least the third fall, the fans sat and watched intensely. The bathroom was virtually unvisited for 60 minutes. There was no concession or merchandise table activity. I love the idea that Wade is just like eagle eye watching the bathroom every time.
I mean, like, wouldn't you have to be in the bathroom to know that?
It was at times like watching a chess match, but everyone sat there staring. In the third fall, that intense investment in the match began to turn to bursts of crowd heat and anticipation for a finish before the 60-minute time limit. The final 10 minutes would be must-see viewing, even for the most impatient fans who prefer Dragon Gate's tag team style matches over the style of Danielson and Nigel. Excellent match, but again, those first 30 minutes aren't for everybody and probably play better live than on DVD. There were some people who left during the first 30 minutes, but not many, and a few hecklers, but not many. That match played well to the Ring of Honor fans who attended. It's not the type of match ROH should be headlining with a year from now, but what's special about ROH is that its main event style varies so widely, but is always state-of-the-art, 4.25 stars.
Why shouldn't they be main eventing? Why shouldn't they be main eventing within a year? I didn't get that part.
Yeah, I don't even know. I was just looking through my notes for something else. I had a note here that I thought was cute. Oh, okay. A couple notes. One was a quarter of the way into this match, Danielson crashes into a barricade in front of a woman, and she gives like a genuine, like terrified yelp. And then as Danielson starts getting attacked by Nigel right in front of her, she goes from like terrified yelp to she's absolutely tickled pink. This is happening right in front of her. And I thought, just if you want to find like a good adorable fan moment, that was a good one. Let me just see. I was trying to see. I like at one point Nigel, he tries to get Nigel to tap out and he says to Nigel, Danielson goes, come on, Nigel, tap. It's only one fall. It's only one fall. I like that he was kind of mocking him, I thought that was also like smart psychology, like the idea, like trying to convince him, like, hey, you could tap now. You could still win the match. Like, just tap out. It's just one fall, buddy. I liked him being kind of a dick doing that. Yeah, Danielson blooding Nigel's nose was crazy because like you can see it happen. Like you can see him grab his nose, smack his hand, and then instantly the nose starts bleeding. I thought MSL, aka Jared David, had a good line on commentary too. This is what I was looking for, the note, where as Prazak is reeling off like all the names that Danielson has defeated during his title reign, MSL just goes, you know you've had a good reign when you've beaten 3 or 4 Chris's alone, which I thought was like a cute line. But then I started thinking about it's like, well, there's certain promotions where like you had been in a promotion that had like Benoit and Jericho, you could have gotten at least 2 right there. But I did think that was a good line. Just looking over my notes. There was so much stuff in this match. I wrote a lot of notes, but we've covered most of it. Bryan even broke out the cross-arm German suplex. You don't see that much from him. I will say this. I've never seen more visible spot calling from Bryan Danielson than this match. He was like very obvious at different moments with it in a way I don't see from him. So I don't know if that was another thing. Maybe he was rattled in some way. Maybe Nigel needed more help because of the concussion. Either way, we get to the end segment. And we also have a great postscript from Wade. That's a really interesting note I like. But so after the draw's announced, crowd chants for 5 more minutes, and then they give a big ROH chant. You may have been able to tell from the cut there that we had some audio issues. One fan chants 1 more hour. After a while, Nigel gets to his feet, and we can hear him say, I'm going to be sick, in like a real legitimate way. Like that didn't seem like him selling to me. That felt like he had a concussion and he was feeling queasy. Nigel salutes the fans as they cheer for him, and Danielson is still there, selling motionless in the ring. Minutes after the match, he hasn't moved still. Nigel then kneels beside Danielson as he and the refs spend quite a while checking on him. Students come in, pour water on Danielson. They're like really selling that he was basically knocked out cold at that finish and that he was saved by the bell. This goes on for a while. Like I timed it. I'll have to check later in my notes. Nigel then tells him as Danielson starts to stir, he was going, you were just knocked out. You were just knocked out. As Danielson finally starts to move just a little bit, and I wrote in my notes, the surreal reality of wrestling is a guy who is suffering a real concussion having to comfort a guy pretending to have a concussion, because that's exactly what was happening here. Danielson wakes up and then acts out wanting to throw up. He's retching as Nigel tells him not to be sick. Again, I think Nigel was legit just saying to the camera that he was going to be sick a few minutes earlier because he has a concussion, and now he's comforting a guy who's pretending to do that. Danielson is selling for so long that you can honest to God, you can hear one fan shout out, hey, isn't there a cop over there? Maybe he knows something. Like maybe this cop can help. More retching from Danielson, more students in the ring, and Danielson finally slowly makes his way to his feet before almost collapsing again. Nigel hugs Bryan. Bryan then gets handed a mic, and he's still selling being fucked up. Bryan tells Nigel that he's been his toughest opponent in a totally humble voice that Bryan hasn't used during this title reign. Like there's no trace of like the kind of cockiness that's normally in his mic work for this title run. Bryan says, people have been asking what's going to happen with the pure title belt now that I have it. Bryan says, although they're retiring the pure title belt, the physical belt belongs to the person who made it. And he hands it to Nigel. Nigel accepts it. He throws it over his shoulder. Then Nigel grabs the mic and says things I can't make out over the PA, unfortunately, because Nigel has a softer voice.
Yeah, and I think this is because he was concussed. He didn't think to like project, I guess.
Yeah, I listened to it a few times. I couldn't make it out. It's just mostly I could tell him being complimentary to Bryan. They shake hands. Nigel raises Danielson's arm. Bryan leaves the ring, struggling to walk and again collapsing and retching. I wrote, Matt, I appreciate them selling the finish to put over how badly Danielson was hurt. But, man, that was 8 minutes of Danielson selling from the end of the match to the moment he got back to his feet. And I also wish we could have heard whatever Nigel had to say. But they definitely tried to really, even though this was kind of knowing this was the end for their feud for a while, they really tried to put over Nigel in that sense. And also, they wrote out the idea that you're not going to see Bryan holding 2 belts, that they've retired the belt. Even though that last show called it unified, really they just give the belt to Nigel and end the reign of the belt. And that brings us to Wade Keller, who had some interesting notes. It sounds like he was backstage for this. Wade wrote, The crowd gave the match a standing ovation for a couple of minutes. Then Nigel finally got his wind and struggled to his feet. Once he got to ringside, he noticed that Danielson wasn't moving. He hadn't moved or twitched since the bell rang, signaling the draw. RH personnel entered the ring and began checking on Danielson. He dry heaved and gasped for breath. There were no indications of a neck injury, but more just sheer exhaustion and perhaps being knocked out or suffering from a concussion. There was a grave sense of concern as the fans stopped applauding and just stood and watched. Despite it being 11:45 p.m., almost nobody left, as everyone wanted to see if Danielson was okay. Danielson finally regained his senses. By this time, Nigel had entered the ring to check on him. Danielson stood unsteadily and asked for the mic. He told Nigel that he was his toughest opponent and said Nigel deserved to possess the pure title, which is being retired since it belongs to the person who made it. Nigel told Danielson he is his toughest opponent too, and about as goddamn real as they come. When Danielson got backstage, colleagues were concerned for him. When asked if he was okay, he looked down and tried to hide a sly grin, then said he just was fine, as if to indicate he was always fine, but proud of how believable he was in selling the effects of the grueling 60-minute battle. In the locker room, Nigel appeared to be the worse for wear, slouched in his chair, looking utterly exhausted, while within minutes, Danielson appeared to have recovered as if it were just another day on the job. The wrestlers and others involved in the show hung out as the ring was taken down and equipment was put away. Some talked to each other, some on their cell phones, some signed autographs, and others just sat around impatiently waiting to leave. About an hour after the final match, everyone collected their bags, figured out driving partners, and head to Chicago for the show the next night. So that last part, Wade, I don't know if you need to bring up just the random things that happened at the end of the show, but I did think that was a really interesting note because we have been talking like Nigel's looking like completely beat to shit on matches, and you noticed that during the match. So I thought to this note, like as you were talking, like this was a match where Nigel looked completely just beat to shit in this match, and Bryan Danielson apparently, from what Wade saw, was fresh as a daisy, and I'm sure nothing bad will happen physically to Bryan Danielson ever again, or even the next night. Now, Matt, that's the show. Now, before, normally we would go to first our overall review, or just our overall thoughts, but it is time, I would believe, for the Matt F. Award, the first ever Matt F.
The
Award.
Matt F. Trophy.
The Matt F. Trophy.
That's a very important detail.
Well, that means you have to send it to somebody.
Yes. Well, so first of all, I will give my final thoughts on the show, and then I will award the Matt F. Trophy.
Okay.
So my final thoughts on the show is this was absolutely like a B show to the point where I think this is really when we start to get to the point where it's like, all right, maybe they have too many shows as far as like quality control is concerned. Like obviously I'm not going to say they should have had less because obviously they need to make their money, but like it's really hitting some of these shows as like these are not always must-see shows anymore. That said, as we know, the floor is high for ROH. I think this is one of the lesser shows of the year from top to bottom, but like, shoot, there's still some really memorable stuff here. The tag title match is really good. That main event, whatever you think of it quality-wise, I'm going to remember that match. Like that's a wild and different kind of match and a different kind of vibe. Some of these B shows are rough with the crowds though. Like this was just, it just didn't have that ROH atmosphere that I love because the crowd was so quiet most of the time. But I thought this was still, there was stuff worth seeing here. I still think that main event was something. Good or bad, something. That's up to someone to decide. I guess Danielson thought it was bad. I thought it was both. So yeah, definitely B show level. All right. The entire show I've been wrestling back and forth with, pun intended, wrestling back and forth with what to give the inaugural Matt F. Trophy to. And I have decided that the trophy will go to, drum roll please, Bryan Danielson's Headlocks.
Woo!
Receives the first ever Matt F. Trophy. I thought it was the most memorable, enjoyable part of this show. I think that it showed a genius at work. I think it is something that I would like to see again before Bryan Danielson retires. I found it incredibly enjoyable. But I will tell you, just in case people were curious, what the runner-up was, what the other possible winner could have been. Do you want to guess?
The the fan that screamed "Fuck the Confederacy."
Should have been that, but I didn't notice.
Matt
really
Sydal for his promos.
Yes, that was it. It was Matt Sydal's promo.
Was it really?
Yes.
God damn it! I didn't know it, but I could tell you enjoyed it. So yeah, Matt Sydal's promo, Bryan Danielson's headlock.
Yeah. So the trophy will be sent in the time machine to the headlock. If you watch this match anytime after I've recorded this, you will see a trophy appear next to Bryan Danielson while he locks in the headlock. But Danielson is so keyed in that he does not even release the headlock when the trophy appears, manifests out of thin air. Doesn't even cause him to blink or release that headlock. That's how good those headlocks were.
And I've always wanted to say this, Matt Sydal, honestly, it's an honor just to be considered for this trophy.
That's right.
There's no shame in it, buddy. I always want to say it's an honor just to be considered.
It was considered. So
yes,
it's true.
So, for my overall thoughts, I agree. I think this might be the most B show we've seen in Ring of Honor. And I would say because of the high ceiling, I did not regret watching the show, but it was funny. This is the longest break we've had between shows. So I was so game to come back. And then we get like what I would think is maybe the worst show we've seen in a long time. And
I don't think it was worse than How We Roll. I don't.
There were two matches I really enjoyed on the show. The last two, I mean, really, by really enjoyed, I mean like 3.5 stars at least. I don't know if there's anything I would quite give 4. Maybe the tag match. I'm not even sure if I would go 4 for that. I think the problem more is just the disappointment that certain things weren't as good as they could have been. And just even, you look in that mid-card section of the show where you get the Jimmy Jacobs homicide match that just does not click in a really significant way. You get the Claudio Daniels match, which is just blah. You get the cult tag, which is fun, but in again a very we're shooting for middle of the road B show kind of way. And then you get the Sydal Delirious match, which feels like the path, the table's been set for them to really go all out, and it's decent enough, it's good, but it's just not. It's missing out on something. But yeah, there's still good work on this, and there's some of the stuff I just mentioned. I still had some fun watching it, and the last hour and a half, I guess you could say, because the last 2 matches take up that long, there's plenty of fun stuff to see in those matches. But I would say this is one of the more least essential shows, although I would argue maybe go out of your way to watch the first 20 minutes just to see Danielson be such a goddamn master at doing this.
The first 20 minutes of the main event.
Yeah, of the main event, I would say, yeah. You don't need to see the Briscoes versus Irish Airborne, which is another match, which is perfectly fine, but you don't need to see it. And then, so now it's time, I guess, for the TWD 500, the first annual. Number 500, Matt Sydal's promo. Number 499, Dave Chris. Number 498, Jake Chris. No, okay, I'm not to do it. So, what I will do, get into plugs. Through the Years at gmail.com. That is THROH for through. We love your emails. If you ever have something you want to say about a live note and a thought, you just want to be really nice to us, that's great. Twitter at Trevor Dame, at Mayor MGF. And next time on the show, we'll be covering the second half of this double shot, a show called Gut Check, where Bryan Danielson wrestles another 60-minute match, a 2 out of 3 falls match, this time with Colt Cabana, a match that turns out to be a incredibly significant match for both Bryan Danielson and Ring of Honor for the rest of the year. He gets hurt, folks. We've touched on it already. I guess there's no need to tease it out. He gets one of the gutsier performances, so much that they call it Gut Check. It's a pretty gutsy performance, and that should be a lot of fun. It's great to be back, Matt. It's great to have you back in North America where you belong. Missed you, buddy. We're here. We're in the fall now. Get cozy. Through the Years is back. So until then, until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.